All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and beyond. My name is Mrinal Patil, and I will be your host for MidCat's EMEA Risk Symposium 2026. What makes this forum special is not just the depth of expertise on this virtual stage, but the diversity of perspectives coming together from boardrooms, operational risk teams, intelligence units, and policy environments across the EMEA region. We already see participants joining from multiple time zones, and we truly appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Just a few announcements before we begin. For those interested, you can see today's discussions on our YouTube channel once uploaded. If you have any questions for the panelists, please put them in the Q&A box, which is separate from the chat box. With that, let's begin. Now, our agenda for the day. We will start with the keynote address by the Right Honourable Sir Robert Buckland. We will then move to our first panel discussion on Global Risk Outlook 2026, moderated by S.M. Kumar, co-founder and managing director of MidCat Advisory. Following this, MidCat's EMEA Risk Outlook 2026 will be unveiled, along with a demonstration of Data Surfer, MidCat's risk intelligence platform by Anushka Mahanta and Abhijit Kode. This will be followed by a second panel discussion on EMEA Risk and Opportunities Outlook 2026, moderated by Farah London, Regional Director, MidCat Advisory. The third and final panel discussion of the day will focus on the intersection of technology, travel security, executive protection, resilience, and duty of care, moderated by Sushil Pradhan, Executive Director and COO of MidCat Advisory. The symposium will conclude with closing remarks by Sandeep Sinha, Executive Director, Risk Consulting and Managed Services, MidCat Advisory. With that, let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning. The Right Honourable Sir Robert Buckland is a former UK Cabinet Minister and a highly respected voice in law, governance, and public policy. He brings a rare combination of constitutional insight and strategic perspective, shaped by years of service at the highest levels of government and continued engagement with leading legal and policy institutions. Sir Robert currently serves as a visiting professor in the practice at the London School of Economics Law School and as a senior counsel and head of policy at Payne Hicks Beach LLP, among several other distinguished professional roles. His keynote will set the tone for today's symposium, examining the intersection of geopolitics, governance, regulation, and institutional resilience in a rapidly changing global environment. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Right Honourable Sir Robert Buckland. Sir, over to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that warm welcome and greetings from London. It's morning here, but good wishes to everybody across the globe who is joining in with today's conference. It's a huge pleasure to be talking to you about leadership, risk and institutional resilience in a fragmenting global order. And as we gather today, we hear news about the end of the US-Russia arms control treaty without a replacement. Another example of how the post-1945 world order is changing, fragmenting, and some would say disintegrating before our eyes. Now, for much of the last generation, risk was treated as a problem to be modelled, to be hedged, to be priced, something to be quantified, diversified, and in the best of worlds, largely neutralized. Now, that world, I think, has gone. Today, risk is no longer a technical function sitting downstream of strategy. It is strategy. And geopolitics now shapes the very architecture of technological development. Regulation now determines market access. National security policy is redrawing supply chains. And institutional strength or weakness now directly affects enterprise value. Now, in this environment, leadership is not measured by how optimistically one speaks about disruption. It's measured by how seriously one prepares for a world in which disruption has become structural. And for those responsible for risk in global technology and technology enabled organizations, it's not a temporary spike in volatility, it's a permanent change in the operating system of our global economy. Take Europe. It's positioned itself as the world's most consequential regulatory actor in technology. Here in the UK, the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act are not simply competition and content moderation regimes. They're instruments of market design, reshaping platform economics, data governance, and liability models, not just here, but across borders. And the EU's Artificial Intelligence Act goes further still. It represents the first attempt by a major economic bloc to impose a comprehensive risk-based legal framework for AI systems, categorizing use cases, allocating responsibility, and creating enforceable obligations for developers and deployers alike. Now, for global technology firms, this creates a new category of risk regulatory extraterritoriality. Bit of a mouthful, but I think you understand the point that I'm making. Design choices made in California, in Bangalore, or Tel Aviv now carry direct consequences in law in Brussels, in Paris, and Berlin. Product architecture becomes a compliance issue. Model training becomes a legal issue. Algorithmic transparency becomes a governance obligation. And leadership here is not about resisting regulation. It's about recognizing that regulatory compliance is now a core design constraint, as fundamental as security, scalability, or performance. And the firms that treat regulation as an afterthought will absorb it as a cost. The firms that integrate it into their strategy, however, will absorb it as an advantage. And nowhere is the fusion of technology and geopolitics more visible than in Asia, particularly in semiconductors, advanced computing, and data governance. Export controls on advanced chips, restrictions on AI accelerators, and scrutiny of cross border technology transfer have transformed what was once a globally optimized supply chain into a strategically segmented one. And for technology companies, I think it's introduced what might be called architectural geopolitics. So, where you design matters, where you fabricate matters, where you train models matters, and where you store and process data also matters. And that semiconductor ecosystem, which spans Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and the US, and of course, increasingly India, has become a central theatre of geopolitical competition. And for boards and risk leaders, it's no longer simply a question of cost efficiency, it's a question of strategic exposure. Concentration risk in fabrication, sovereign risk in jurisdiction, regulatory risk in export control regimes, and operational risk in forced localization. So leadership here requires accepting a hard truth. Redundancy is no longer inefficiency, it's resilience. And duplication of capacity, diversification of suppliers, and regionalization of critical systems might increase cost in the short term, but they reduce existential exposure. Now, that's not a technical judgment, it is a strategic one. In the Middle East, technology risk is increasingly intertwined with national transformation agendas and digital sovereignty. Gulf states are investing heavily in cloud infrastructure, smart cities, AI capability, and digital government, often in partnership with global technology providers. Now, that creates enormous opportunity, but it also creates new layers of risk. Data localization requirements, for example, national security-based access controls, cyber security regulation that's tied to critical infrastructure, cross-border data transfer restrictions, and evolving standards around encryption, lawful access, and platform responsibility. So again, for cloud and platform providers, it means that infrastructure is no longer neutral, it's strategic. So where data resides, who can access it, which legal system governs any disputes, and how cybersecurity obligations are enforced, all of these are now matters of sovereign interest. So leadership in this environment requires deep institutional literacy, understanding not just the political leadership of a jurisdiction, but the maturity and the independence of its regulatory bodies, its courts, and its enforcement mechanisms. So technology risk in the Middle East is not simply cyber risk, it is governance risk as well. So across regions, one further trend I think is unmistakable. Interdependence is being weaponized. Sanctions regimes increasingly target technology components, software access, cloud services, and the financial plumbing that has to exist to make all of this happen. And cybersecurity is no longer merely a matter of technical resilience, it's a question of national security. With ransomware attacks, intellectual property theft, state linked cyber operations now sitting right at the intersection of criminal law, national security law, and international relations themselves. And for technology firms, it creates a compliance environment in which a mere software update can become a sanctions risk. A cloud contract can become a national security issue. A data architecture choice can become a regulatory liability. And a vendor relationship can become a geopolitical exposure. So, what does leadership here mean? Well, it means ensuring cybersecurity, legal, compliance, and geopolitical analysis are not siloed. So reliance has to be cross-functional. Otherwise, it's a complete illusion in terms of resilience, I mean. So for risk leaders, institutional resilience is not a philosophical preference. It is a financial variable. Strong courts reduce enforcement volatility. Independent regulators reduce arbitrary compliance shocks. Clear rulemaking reduces product and platform risk, and predictable dispute resolution reduces capital risk. Weak institutions, by contrast, magnify every operational decision. And that's why firms that invest in governance, in legal capability, regulatory engagement, and institutional relationships are not indulging in needless overheads or vanity projects. They're building strategic capital. And in this environment, governance is not the cost of doing business, it is part of the business model itself. So, what is the mandate for leaders in our virtual room today? It's no longer enough to manage downside. You are now stewards of strategic interplay between your organizations and the state. You are interpreters of regulatory intent. Your early warning systems for geopolitical shift. Your custodians of legal credibility and your architects of institutional resilience. So your decisions shape not only compliance outcomes, but strategic freedom itself. And that is leadership in its most demanding form. So let me end where I began. This is not a cyclical period of disruption. It is a structural one. The global order is being rewritten before our eyes, not in a single treaty or summit, but in export control lists, in regulatory codes, in data laws, in sanctions regimes, and institutional practices. Now, in such a world, the most valuable asset any organization possesses is not speed alone, it is trust. Trust in law, trust in governance, trust in institutions, trust in leadership. And the organizations that will endure will not be those that gamble on a return to frictionless globalization. They will be those that build for a world where law, regulation, and geopolitics are permanent features of strategy and where resilience is designed, not improvised. Leadership in this era is not about outrunning uncertainty, but it is about building institutions, systems, and cultures that are strong enough to live with it, without surrendering principle, legitimacy, or strategic coherence. That's the real measure of leadership in a fragmenting world, and it is a measure that history and markets will take very seriously indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for that insightful and thought-provoking address. Your perspectives on governance, regulation, and institutional resilience have provided a strong foundation for the discussions that are to be followed. We'll now build on those themes through our panel sessions. So, thank you.
Thank you.
We now move on to the first panel discussion of the day on Global Risk Outlook 2026, moderated by SM Kumar, co-founder and managing director, Midcat Advisory. Over to you, SM Kumar.
So request all the panelists to kindly join in. Yeah, I can see Pramod, I can see Martin, Irina. Yeah, thank you. Alex. Alex, request you to kindly join in and switch on your camera. So Right Honorable Sir Robert Buckland, thank you for getting us off to a flying start. Loved your take on leadership in a fragmented world and hope you'll stay on to listen to other esteemed speakers. So Excellencies, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome to panel discussion 1 on Global Risk Outlook 2026. Thank you all for joining us from across the globe. Let me introduce my exceptional panelists. Irina Zuckerman. Irina is a national security and human rights lawyer. She is the president, Scarab Rising, a unique advisory company specializing in media, communications, reputation management, and security strategy. Irina is fellow at Arabian Peninsula Institute, at Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, and board member at the Washington Center for Information Warfare. With a background in national security and international humanitarian law, she specializes in forward-looking assessments of regime resilience, conflict spillover, and systematic geopolitical risks. So Irina, thank you for joining us early in the morning from chilly New York City. Professor Martin Gill, winner of several distinguished awards. It's a long list. I can't probably enumerate every, otherwise it will take me 45 minutes. So winner of several distinguished awards and author of 15 best-selling books. Again, I can't name the books. It will take half the panel time. So Professor Martin Gill is one of the world's most influential criminologists and security thought leaders. He spends a lot of time with criminals and has learned a lot from them. Martin is director, Perpetuity Institute. He is the founder of OSPAS, Cyber OSPAS, TechAS, Security and Safety Entrepreneur Awards, Workplace Violence Reduction Awards, and few more things. He's the member of ACES Board and trustee of ACES Foundation. Professor Gill, it was an exceptional honor to share the stage with you at Mumbai last week, and looking forward to an equally high quality conversation today.
Thank you.
Pramod Bhatt. Pramod is a distinguished Indian Army veteran, alumnus of IIM Ahmedabad, India's leading B school, based at Paris. He is the regional security director at a leading global healthcare organization. He has earlier held leadership positions in security, safety, risk, and resilience with a leading global bank, as well as a global risk consultancy. A global citizen, Pramod is about to publish a book, Beyond Boundaries. Time permitting, I'll definitely ask him about the forces shaping the world, something he is about to unveil in his book, I Have Reliably Learned. So thank you, Pramod.
Thanks.
So Alex Bomberg is an international security and counter-espionage expert. He is the CEO and founder of the Intelligence UK Holdings Limited Group of companies. Alex is a member of the Security Institute and a fellow of the Institute of Strategic Risk Management. With over 25 years of experience in the industry, Alex discusses counter-espionage and AI risks, including deepfakes. He has spoken extensively at international conferences on these subjects, including at Risk Minds London, Leaders in Security Dubai, and the Middle East Security Conference, as well as on panels with Midcat in London. He has also spoken at my college, King's College London, and I will quiz you on that. So please be prepared. Ladies and gentlemen, we have about 45 minutes. This is how I would like to progress the conversation, and I'll be very fair in time distribution. I will take 3 to 4 minutes to provide an overview of the global risks. Esteemed panelists get 3 to 4 minutes each for opening remarks. I would like you to cover the risks likely to impact businesses in 2026, along with your opening remarks. In round two, we will discuss measures to mitigate risks and to strengthen organizational resilience. Time permitting, we'll take few questions from the audience, so reach out to Q&A box. In the end, each speaker gets 20 to 30 seconds to wind up and a soundbite. So my 4 minutes start now. Ladies and gentlemen, a couple of weeks back, I was in Davos, where 60 heads of states and 1,000 CEOs had gathered. Geopolitics and AI dominated the conversation. Anxiety about AI, misinformation, and cybersecurity was high. Despite President calling it a green hoax, environmental concerns had not gone off the radar. But it was geopolitics that stole the limelight, beginning with that famous speech by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney about rupture of the world order. He exhorted middle powers to unite, warning, if we are not on the table, we are on the menu. As part of the Donroe Doctrine, Trump has declared Western Hemisphere as the area of highest priority. After capture of Venezuela's Maduro, Greenland, Panama, and Gulf of Mexico, oblique America, whatever you want to call it, they are on his radar. So Middle East is in the news. US-Iran tensions run high after deadly protests in Iran and massive US force buildup in the region. Iran-Israel rhetoric is heating. There is talk of rift between Saudi Arabia and UAE, and Trump-led Board of Peace is attempting a whole new approach to resolving Israel-Palestine question. On the positive side, two peace talks are happening, one in Oman between US and Iran, and the US-mediated talks between Ukraine and Russia in Abu Dhabi. So in Asia, relations between China and India thawed. However, Sino-Japanese relations have nosedived. Tensions across Taiwan Straits, South China, and Korean Peninsula continue to remain high. Over the past few years, South Asia witnessed overthrow of elected governments by popular protests in Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Even as Pakistan continues to foment trouble in Kashmir, its own economic woes continue to mount, and Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and Baloch insurgents continue deadly attacks. In Southeast Asia, Myanmar under military rule had a sham election. Neighboring Bangladesh may have a troubled election with Awami League kept out of the fray. Cambodia and Thailand have traded blows. ASEAN nations continue to walk a tightrope, delicately balancing their relations with the two great powers. In Africa, challenges abound with inter and intra-state disputes, water conflicts, coup, civil wars, rigged elections, curbs on media freedom, insurgency, terrorism, famine, and more. Globally, misinformation is being rated as one of the top threats. Insider threats are more damaging than the external ones. AI is lowering the entry barrier for financial criminals. Cryptocurrency is easing money laundering and use of stolen funds. There is surge in financial crime, and governments are struggling to respond to speed and scale of change. Globally, India is in sweet spot with high growth rates exceeding 7% and two mega trade deals in the last 2 weeks, first with the EU and then with the US. So technology disruptions continue unabated. Last year, DeepSeek shook the Americans. The launch of Claude Cowork by Anthropic very recently has shaken the global software industry, owing to fears that agentic coworkers could replace humans and possibly the companies that employ them. I could go on and on, but let me turn to my impressive panelist, and I'm done in 3.5 minutes. Okay. So Pramod, to you first for your opening remarks of 3 to 4 minutes. Would request you to simply cover the top few risks likely to impact businesses in 2026 as it appears from your vantage point.
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me here. And I think you really spoke about World Economic Forum Davos that pretty much covered many of the risks. But probably I will take it a step above to give broader perspective why it is happening, what happened before. So I would say if you look at many civilization or many empires which happened before today's empire, we had British Empire, we had Ottoman Empire, we had Roman Empire. That's a time when the cycle was longer. Those empires declined in 3 centuries or 4 centuries, or maybe 2 centuries. That's what we saw that time. But with globally connected world, what we are seeing, this cycle is going to diminish. So it's becoming probably US kind of empire right now is probably a century or maybe a less than a century. It started declining. I think all empire declined. There could be, I generally say primarily two reasons behind it. Uh, One is desire for more. One is desire for more wealth, more resources, and that's quite natural. It's a human thing which is inbuilt. Second thing is desire for dominance. And what we see here, you can look at any conflict, any war which is happening today, which has happened in the past, you will find these two core regions behind it, desire for more and desire for dominance. And this is what we see now is happening right now. But coming to the risk now, I would say if I have to divide geopolitical, which is being more spoken about and impacting many of our companies and in fact us as well directly where I dealt with. So if I have to divide the geopolitical risk into maybe three categories, geographically wise, one is the world order. The world order, everybody knows that it's changing, leading to a bigger global divide. And this global divide is also leading a lot of risk for us. For example, the outcome of this global divide is the war between Russia and Ukraine. And we have operations there, and then we got involved, started educating employees about how to prevent yourself from an incoming missile, how to prevent yourself when there's an enemy troop next to your village. So we have done this training, which we never thought that we will train and employ about how to prevent themselves from these situations. So big disruption. Other disruption, trade barriers, supply chain disruption, it's happening all around. Beside this, we also see US-China rivalry. Probably some war started happening right now is the currency war. So that's you see the gold price going up and silver price going up, and people are switching slowly away from US dollars, fiat currency primarily, not backed by anything, considering the US debt mounting. So that's a big global divide which we see coming and causing a lot of issues for all organizations. Other factor which we see is regional divide. So this is similar, but at a regional level. When you look at from Asia perspective, you see the China versus Philippines, China versus Japan, China versus so and so, China versus India as well. On other side, because we are in EMEA, we see here a lot of noise happening in the regional divide in the Middle East, which is Iran and its proxy versus Saudi Arabia and allies. Then Iran, its proxies versus Israel. And this has been causing a lot of noise, direct disruption. Everybody knows what happened in 12-day war between Israel and Iran. We also saw disruption happening in Yemen when UAE and KSA got into tension situation. So we are going to see more and more this disruption happening because of regional divide. Now, what is happening from this global disruption and the regional divide is resulting into many failing and fragile countries. And when we say failing and fragile countries, these are the countries which have been impacted because of this friction between these blocks. For example, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and many more. So when you have these failing and fragile states, obviously economic situation there is pretty bad. People don't have any avenue for earning money. They tend to move out. Obviously, they want to have a better life, at least have some money and some food. So they move out. Most of them are also moving out to Europe. And what we have seen, huge number of influx, but what is happening is with them, there are a lot of antisocial elements also comes in. So what we are seeing Europe, a few people who come in, as very difficult for them to get integrated with the society. And we have been increasingly seeing a lot of incident. For example, you can pick up maybe one last 1 year incident. You will see every week there's a knife stabbing incident happening in Europe. And we are now training our employees. If you're on a train in a London tube or in Paris or anywhere else, how do you prevent yourself from stabbing? We used to train on active shooting for US. Here it's difficult to buy a weapon, but here you can always have a knife and attack people. So this is what we are seeing geographically divide, though there are other risks like AI and climate change and societal divide, which we see impact. But I think other panelists are going to cover about it. That's all from my side on this.
Thank you. Thank you. That's an impressive overview, Pramod. Irina, United States, the major source of disruptions. To you next. See, United States, the architect and underwriter of global rules-based order, is no longer willing to carry that burden. Can you throw some light on the role of trade wars in fomenting uncertainty and instability, geopolitical alliance shifts and their impact on risk assessment, and human security in corporate culture and risk assessment? Over to you for your opening remarks for 3 to 4 minutes.
Thank you so much. So indeed, we are hearing a lot that international law is no longer applying, that different international agreements are no longer respected, they're no longer meaningful in any way. How does that affect cross-border commerce? How does that affect the rule-based system? In reality, the view is that the outcomes are increasingly determined by power, leverage, and political intent. That's not to say that rules don't exist, they still do, but they operate more as instruments and justifications within power competition rather than stable constraints on it. And that applies to all of these three elements that we just discussed. To trade wars, to shifting geopolitical alliances, and who we choose as allies and how our allies see each other, and also to human security, meaning the role of the human factor in business, in interactions. Trade wars are at the nexus of this transformation because they convert geopolitics into direct price and access signals. We are talking about tariffs, export controls, sanctions, subsidies, and also localization mandates. They are operating as mechanisms rewiring how industries are organized, which supply chains end up being viable, and which companies are able to scale their business across border. The economic impact is not limited simply to increased costs, but because there is a more profound effect in that policy becomes a recurring variable inside market pricing and not just a rare disruption outside of it. We are talking about erosion of trust, erosion of stability. Companies start to discover that a cost advantage can vanish when a category is suddenly restricted, that a growth plan can be invalidated when access is becoming conditional, and that the direction of investment can be reshaped by government incentives designed to pull capacity into politically favored jurisdictions. This also means that government intervention is becoming more frequent, and it turns trade and alliance dynamics into immediate corporate constraints because countries, governments are increasingly willing to shape outcomes directly rather than waiting for markets to sort winners and losers. Intervention appears across the entire life cycle of corporate activity, from investment approvals and ownership screening to data localization, technology deployment restrictions, pricing pressure, labor policies, and even informal guidances that become mandatory in practice. These actions are often framed through broad concepts such as national security, resilience, fairness, or public interest, which makes their scope elastic, unpredictable, and their application extremely context-dependent. And this matters because it produces selective enforcement as a normal feature of the environment. Similarly situated companies can experience very different treatment based on visibility, strategic sensitivity, ownership optics, or the narrative climate at the moment a decision is made. And that affects how geopolitical alliances function. We are seeing that the shifts in these alliances are intensifying the pressures that companies are feeling because they're now functioning as economic ecosystems rather than mere diplomatic backdrops. Those conflicts that some of my preceding commentators have mentioned are exactly the sort of economic and business pressure points that have an impact on how cross-border transactions and um, systemic communications are functioning due to realignment in loyalties, pressure points, and even interventions by the states seeking comparative advantage. Alignment increasingly determines the operating terms attached to market participation, where the companies have to register, including also expectations about data governance, technology standards, security obligations, acceptable ownership structures, and even the political acceptability of different types of partnerships. And as these shifts become more and more dramatic, the management and meaning of ordinary corporate decisions is shifting just as rapidly, so that supplier choices, platform architecture, R&D location, and even internal governance structures are being reinterpreted within these rapid shifts. And this is where the corporate challenge becomes structural. Multinational strategies that are built for integrated markets are encountering incompatible requirements across blocks, and a company's efforts to satisfy one set of expectations can create risk and vulnerabilities in another. And that brings us to the third element of human security. Human security is deeply affected by the increasing and growing political polarization and the rise of extremist movements that amplify the unpredictability of government interventions and these other second order effects, because policy then becomes less technocratic and more symbolic, more reactive to domestic feeling by the populations, more responsive to short-term political incentives. Economic decisions are then framed as moral or security imperatives rather than commercial disputes, which lowers the threshold for abrupt action and increases the likelihood of retroactive reinterpretation, targeted scrutiny, or public campaigns against companies that become convenient stand-ins for larger political conflicts. And the US-China divide is one of those features. We are seeing that in China, US companies are increasingly under national security scrutiny, and vice versa in the United States as well. The realignment among Gulf states, the tensions among them is causing companies having to hedge on the one hand, and on the other hand, the people who are working in those environments are likewise scrutinized as clientele. They have additional pressures of having to align themselves based on state affiliation and not merely company choice. And of course, corruption and authoritarian drift are adding yet another pressure point to the human security element, because in some environments, informal influence becomes as decisive as formal process. Practical conditions of operating depend not only on written rules, but also on relationships, favor, and perceived loyalty. And for global companies, this creates layered risk where ethical constraints, legal obligations, devotion to international legal frameworks across jurisdiction, and commercial imperatives are colliding. They become, they're in a state of conflict and flux, and compliance can satisfy auditors on a purely commercial level, but fail to prevent coercion, arbitrary treatment, and forced concession.
Irina,
Mhm,
we'll come to you again in the part two. I
mhm.
don't want to keep the other speakers waiting. So we'll have everybody's opening remarks and we'll take that as well as your proposed solutions to these challenges. So thank you, because you've covered so much ground in about 5-6 minutes. So we will next go to Professor Martin Gill. So Martin, thank you for waiting. we've seen that criminals are always a step or two ahead of the good guys. They have proved to be remarkably adept at the use of modern technologies. They always improvise better, faster, more efficiently. So, what can we learn from the bad guys to be able to stay ahead of them? To you for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much indeed, Sam. Thank you for the speakers who've gone before. It's been enlightening to say the least. I think one of the points about speaking to offenders, as you say, Sam, is that I'm not sure one or two steps ahead is quite right. It seems to be a lot more than that. One criminologist has described it as a war that, on the one hand, criminals look to test measures and they find a way around it, and then security and crime prevention people respond. But the odds are so much better for the criminal. It's easier to test out what's there and find gaps than it is to predict the gaps and fill them in advance. And we find that offenders are very adaptable, and they have been throughout time. And I think the thing that's changed, though, and I think this is the dramatic thing, when the MitCat team first asked me about this, I was actually in their offices last week, and we were talking about this seminar. They're talking about business risks and the offender's perspective. And my immediate reaction was, if you're speaking to offenders, the risk in a business is whatever's easy. When you speak to offenders and you ask them why they've chosen a target, invariably they say, because it was easy. I think the other carrier to that is lucrative. The two things that are most in their mind when they're committing an offence are, one, get the money or goods, depending what's important, and two, don't get caught, particularly don't get caught. But that's really relatively easy these days. If you wanted to design a system that was made for offenders, you'd pretty much make sure it was something like it is now. I mean, after all, it's possible nowadays to commit a crime from a different territory. This complicates the policing process. It's possible to commit crimes from different territories when there isn't great collaboration between countries. There's plenty of information on the dark web about how to do it, plenty of examples and reference points and tools. Moreover, you've got a technological world which is changing rapidly. And it's very difficult to keep up to date with all the latest technology, much less when you're a business, keep it updated and justifying all the budgets. On top of that, you've got an attitude towards offending, which is, this is lucrative. The chances of getting caught are low. Even if I am caught, I'm not likely to be prosecuted. And if I am prosecuted, I'm likely to get away with it. I mean, my goodness, if you wanted to create a situation where the odds were in favour of the offender, you'd pretty much create it now. And the context in which I say this is that if we're looking at risks, I think it's very, very telling that whether they be supply chain, insider risk has already been mentioned, and it is a very pernicious one, or indeed external risk. The key is that for good business, you have to be on your ball all the time. And many of you know, and it was mentioned in my introduction by Sam, that I run award schemes. And you know, the thing I've learned about award schemes from around the world, the award schemes are recognizing those who are outstanding at security. And you know, the thing that I've learned about being outstanding at security around the world, particularly when you think that I come at this from the offender's perspective, is that being good at security is an extremely difficult thing to do. It's very, very good to be good on any one day. It's very, very good to have lots of measures. But targeting these measures against the threats posed by offenders, making sure they're up to date, implemented possible, and used in the best possible way are extremely difficult things to do, and they have been throughout time. And that's why recognizing outstanding performance is important, and recognizing that the threat by offenders is very, very serious and getting easier, not more complicated. Sam, I'm conscious of time, and I know you're running a bit behind, so I'll stop at that point, shall I?
So, Martin, thank you for keeping it brief. I'll give you more time in the second round because you really kept it brief, under 2 minutes. So, Alex, Martin alluded to insider threats, and obviously they are becoming a much bigger concern than external ones. Last year, you gave a lecture at my college, King's College London, on commercial espionage cases. I hope you still remember, because after that, you would have given lots of lectures other places. So, and you, just to jog your mind, you discussed, and very recently you have discussed commercial espionage case, and you have linked the two, and you expanded on the Mises theory. I mean, for benefit of everyone, you could explain money, ideology, coercion, ego, sex, and insider threats. And Martin alluded that it is often, a combination of motivated offender, suitable target, and security not being good on a particular day. So, in your opening remarks of 3 to 4 minutes, would you like to cover AI and espionage and talk about the risks involved, how companies and their supply chains are exposed, and how they must stay ahead of the curve? And what is it that your clients are most worried about? So, all yours, Alex.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you, MitCat, for having me on. I've had a relationship with MitCat for a few years, and it's all been good. So thank you, Sam. So I just want to follow on actually from what Professor Martin said. The criminals are absolutely one step ahead, more than one step ahead in most cases, and unfortunately, we're in a situation where most companies are not even on the curve, in fact, let alone stay ahead of a curve. When you look at most companies these days, we're not talking about the largest companies in the world that have got, intelligence cells, risk analysts, various security managers working for them. We're talking about the medium-sized companies mainly. They're the majority companies out there. They're the companies in the supply chain that are the weakest, and they're the companies that are going to get targeted. And we've seen it. Even yesterday, I was contacted by a former client who's trying to be extorted using artificial intelligence. We're seeing huge rise in the crimes using AI now and deep fake, and this is a real issue. It's a real issue when you mix in insider threat and you mix in social engineering. We've got to remember we live in a very global world now where everything is interconnected. There's a lot of long drawn out supply chains. We know how the sanctions on China affected a lot of companies, and certainly in Europe we really felt it with the Ukraine. When the Ukraine war started, all of a sudden supply chains got hit, and there was no resilience. So we've come, I think we're at the stage now where a lot of companies, medium and large, understand a bit more about resilience. But we've got this issue now with artificial intelligence, and I really feel that we're massively at risk. Even local government and national government is at risk from this new AI deep fake technology that's out there. Critical national infrastructure concerns me. We've all got such a reliance on power and on the internet, and they're areas that are massively at risk. But I think that if we talk about one of the things I've lectured on is the rise now with deep fake. How are we seeing that play out for sort of medium and large companies? Well, we can look at the Arup case in 2024, in fact, in Hong Kong, when a member of the accounts team in Hong Kong for Arup was contacted via email, and he believed that he was receiving an email from his accountancy directors based in the UK, asking him to come onto a Zoom call, and the Zoom call was a live Zoom call with cameras on, just like this, and everybody was speaking, and it seemed normal and natural. And the account executive was asked to take part in a special secretive project for the company and transfer £20 million. And a lot of social engineering was used in this. He was told that he was valued. He was a valued member of the organisation, and that they were coming to him because he was trustworthy, and and all these things. So they're pushing all the right buttons with this gentleman, and he ended the call, didn't think anything of it, and made these secretive transfers, 9 transfers totaling £20 million, and only came suspicious a few weeks later when he hadn't had any follow-up. This was an amazing deep fake that was done live on a Zoom call. And it just shows how fast this technology is coming on. I worry about the political landscape. The next few elections that we see that are going to be very important internationally. Well, what news can we trust now? We're at that stage now where a lot of young people don't watch BBC, don't watch CNN, don't watch Fox. They actually get most of their most of their news input from the internet, from posts on X, from posts on Facebook and the like, and such platforms. So if it's so easy to manipulate situations and create deep fakes, where do we go from here? I was on a panel with MitCat in London, and it was for PwC. Well, sorry, with PwC as well, and we were talking about AI in risk analysis and how that plays out. And we were talking about scenarios with deep fake in relation to riots. If you were doing your travel intelligence and that showed that there was a riot in Hong Kong in a certain street, years ago you could have relied on your analyst to say, hang on a minute, that footage is wrong. That video footage is wrong. They're speaking the wrong language or the wrong dialect or the uniform slightly wrong. Nowadays, we can take a street and we can create a riot in a street, and it'll look like a Hollywood movie. It will look like it's being filmed on someone's mobile. Absolutely, completely 100% deep fake. And this is what concerns me. We will see political uprising based on deep fake. How do we draw it in? We all know that the most important person in the world and the thickest person in the world shouldn't be the same person. So, we're at a problem. We've got an issue where you've got presidents saying outlandish things and doing outlandish things. So this is, where do you believe deep fake? Where does it start, and what do companies do to get ahead of the curve or even get on the curve? I shall talk about that in the next section, I hope, Sam.
Thank you, Alex. And with that, we come to the end of round one. So global risk outlook, we tried to cover the major risks likely to impact businesses, supply chains, and us as normal citizens. In round two, we shall look at what organizations are doing or should be doing to mitigate risks to their businesses, assets, and supply chains, and to strengthen organizational resilience. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box. We're likely to have time for one or two questions. In round two, I would request esteemed speakers to keep your remarks to about 2 minutes to each question. So Pramod, back to you. You covered risks very eloquently in round one, a very wide landscape covered. What should countries be doing to strengthen resilience? Because a resilient country provides stability and predictability, and that contributes greatly to resiliency of organizations. We don't discuss too much of that at national level. And would you like to also briefly talk about what's coming in your new book, Beyond Boundaries and Forces Reshaping the Whole World, which you alluded? You have about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes for all of it.
Thank you very much. I think really it's quite important. Organization may have best of the resiliency, but if they are in a country which is not resilient enough to deal with these forces, you would probably see more direct impact on organizations. So I think it's becoming more and more important for nations or countries to become more resilient. The question is how. Sir Robert spoke about it, that the new reality has set in. Country should be preparing against those risks. Irina spoke about resiliency. But the question is how? Is there a framework? Is there some kind of index available? Like, in organization, there is an index. We have index. Every company has. Does country has anything like this? No. They do, in a fragmented way, but there's nothing as of now. And that's why one of my chapter in my book is dedicated something called Global Conflict Resiliency Index. And does have parameters, and this is where probably country should focus on. And a lot of practical example. Maybe I can give you some of these parameters and maybe measure one of the I think strongest global power against those parameters, whereas their resiliency. So one of the parameter I say in resiliency is about inclusive global governance, which is about strengthening global institution participation in those. And if we compare one of the global power, the US, is probably that pillar of resiliency is declining. They've been pulling out from various global forums. They've been pulling out from WTO or WHO or many others, causing huge disruptions. So that resiliency pillar, they're declining. The other pillar is very important, regional diplomacy pillar. We see many solution or many things has been solved by regional organizations, whether in Asia or in Africa Union. Many issues have been solved by the regional effectiveness because I think they're closer to conflict. They have a deeper understanding. But what we see here is there's not much focus on this. There is not funding of these organizations locally. And we see US is probably also detesting from strengthening those regional pillars. So in that front, that resiliency also declining. The third pillar is more about addressing internal social parameters. For example, poverty or inequality or education. That's very important for a country as well. And when I compare this with the United States, their Gini coefficient, which measures the difference between inequality, is the highest since last 5 decades. It's 0.48 right now, and one is probably the highest. So they are in that situation where that pillar is also becoming weaker. Then the other pillar is like climate cooperation, then the other pillars like economic interdependence index, and then cultural soft power, many other parameters, like 10 of them. So collectively, I think every nation needs to think about that they need to have this resiliency index, and they should measure and do the stress testing that how resilient are they, like company, right? It's time to scale it up to a national level and then do it. Just 30 seconds about my book, since you spoke about. The book name is Beyond Boundaries, The Forces of Desire and Supremacy Shaping Our World. It digs deep into the core reasons behind every conflict at individual level, societal level, at a global level. And then it talks about how present day media is amplifying those forces, and then talks about how we can resolve it at individual level, how we can address, and how we can address at a global level as well. And then there's a conflict resolution frameworks as well made, because all those frameworks which were invented during after Second World War are falling apart because the power equation were totally different. Now the power equation has changed. So we need to modify and update our resolution frameworks as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Pramod, and good wishes. Maybe it may be a bestseller. I'll definitely order my copy.
Sure.
Okay, Alex, in your opening remarks, you eloquently covered the risks from AI and espionage. What can organizations do to stay ahead of the curve? And can you illustrate it with a real life example? All of it in 2 minutes.
Sure, I shall try. Thank you, Sam. So I think the major thing we need to look at is internal cultures of organizations. Security and risk should be part of what everyone does. I know, most large companies have got a large department that deal with security and risk, but we need to try and build security and risk. We're talking about real resilience within an organization, whatever the size. Try and make security and risk part of everyone's job. That's how you make more difficult. You've got to educate people. You've got to talk about the risks of the company. You've got to try and understand your company and your organization. What is it within your organization? Where are the potential pinch points? Where might you fall foul of supply chain fraud? Where are your weak points in your organization? So I think understanding your organizations, quite important. When we look at the Arup case, we can look at there's a number of things that concern me about that case. One of them is that we haven't sort of asked if there's any insider threat involved in that Arup case. I personally think, just knowing what I know about the case, maybe there was, because did somebody know the internal workings of the business enough to know what would trigger an investigation internally, or what would trigger a stop on a transfer? Why 9 transfers totaling 20 million? Why a certain number? How did that work? Did somebody have working knowledge of that? So the checks and measures within a company as well, that's really important, making sure that you have got checks and measures in this time where we're working in environments where everyone's working from home and people, not so many people in the office. You need to know your people in accounts. You need to have a relationship with these people so that you can properly ask questions. And also, people should feel free to question. I think that goes down to security culture. These are the basics of security that don't really cost any money. I'm sure that Professor Martin, when he talks about criminology, talks about things like rational choice theory. This is how criminals work. They prey on the easy spaces within a company, and also the grey spaces that companies don't normally care about. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, awesome. So Martin, there are a lot of young professionals in the audience. If you have one advice for them, or even two, what would it or these be?
I would say listen to the panelists. As a criminologist, we've had rational choice theory, routine activities theory, and there's me thinking, as a criminologist, do not speak too much theory. And the panelists are already fantastic. I mean, here's the point about being a young security professional. What an opportunity. What a fantastic world this is for young people looking for an exciting and challenging career. We did a study just a little while back looking at why people chose to work in the security sector. And by far, the most common reason why people work in the security sector is by accident. They fell into it. Can you imagine? That's the, and I mean by corporate and private security sector, I mean by that. Plenty of people want to join the military, plenty of people want to join policing, law enforcement, uniform careers. And yet when you ask people, why did you stay in the security sector? They point to things like interesting career, opportunity to do good, delighted to be part of something important, pays well, despite what other people have said, because they tend to judge security on the front line rather than the broader career opportunities, and plenty of opportunities. And what a pity the world doesn't know that. What a pity the world doesn't know those reasons, and we can't get them into schools and universities. So the thing I would say about to young security professionals is you're on the right lines here. This is a massive career, massive opportunities, and a really exciting one. But look, this is a complex world, and every speaker so far has in different ways alluded to that. And a lot of knowledge is needed in order to be very good at what you do. You'll have heard me say before, Sam, but I do want to say here again. When you speak to us offenders, they are extremely astute in preying on the weak link. And that is why I keep repeating this point about being outstanding at security is not a trivial matter. It's really, really important to recognize, at least from an offender's point of view, there is a world of difference between being outstanding and merely good. If it's outstanding security and it threatens an offender, they'll simply go somewhere else. Maybe they'll stop. More likely, they'll go somewhere else. But if it's just good, it means there are gaps. And those gaps are what they exploit. And so for young people, I would say there is a great opportunity to keep abreast of the opportunity here to do something important and to respond to something that's not going to go away. In fact, there are more opportunities on the horizon. And I think one of the other advantages that young people have, certainly above people like me, is that they've grown up with technology and so more familiar with understanding both the problem and the potential solutions. So one of the things that I look at around the world, and interestingly, on the awards I do, we offer young security professional. It's becoming more and more popular and more and more attractive. So other ways of identifying who's really outstanding and encouraging them and celebrating what's good about their achievements.
Martin, how good are the best security professionals? Are there
Well, this
only
is the thing. This is the thing. This is the thing I would say. Contrary to I think the perception sometimes, it seems to me, and we do awards in 48 countries on the Outstanding Security Performance Awards, that in every country, I would say the very best are simply outstanding. I would say, though, in the same breath, that, and I think this is true of people on this call, and what there are 177, I believe, at this very moment. And I blame you. And let me tell you why I blame you. Because there's one thing I don't think you're very good at. And in fact, I think you're very bad at. And it's a very bad thing to be bad at. And it's this: you are not very good at saying how good you are. And you are not very good at communicating the difference between what you do and what happens if you don't do it, and the business and social benefits that accrue from the work that you do. And this is why it strikes me we need to celebrate those who are really good, recognize that it does matter if you're outstanding. It does matter because this is such an important area of work. And I think the security world needs to be better, if you don't mind me saying so, at speaking up just how important it is, just how effective it is, and just what an enormous contribution it makes, both to a good society and indeed to enabling organisations, not just to protect their assets, but enabling them to operate at all, including in the most difficult circumstances. This is the most undersold world or professional group you can imagine. Therein lies another opportunity for all of us, but perhaps especially for the young professional.
I said the most undersold group of professionals. I think
That's
that,
my take.
yes, so great. Irina, we have 1 minute left before I go on to, final concluding remarks so you can complete, I'll let you complete your remarks because you had lots to say. You said a lot and a lot was still left. And if you just want to hazard a guess, who will win the US midterm elections? And how important will it be? You can take in any order. I knew I threw a googly, but please go on.
So essentially, I would just frame what I said in one simple way. A lot of geopolitical risk is actually quite predictable. There are red flags, there are signs that something bad is coming. And geopolitical risk is no longer, like cybersecurity, is no longer a luxury. It's no longer an option. It's something that needs to be planned for in advance, whether we're talking about election interference, whether we're talking about tariffs, whether we're talking about general volatility. This needs to be part of a calculus, both by not just by mega companies and transnational companies, but also small, medium-sized businesses. Otherwise, they will experience what has happened to a lot of businesses in Trump's second term. They lose customers, they lose business, they become dependent, and they're not prepared for what's coming. They go out of business. What it means is you need to have advanced planning and you need to read the room very carefully. President Trump during his campaign suggested that he was going to use tariffs quite extensively. He also very clearly stated that he prefers volatility on the market. This is the sort of thing that should be a signal to any professional, not just geopolitical risk consultants, but CEOs, CFOs, everyone in the company. They should know what is coming, and they should plan to shield the capital around it. They should also be investing in forward-looking intelligence and due diligence capabilities to assess geopolitical threats before they come, to assess whether expansion is moving forward is something that can be planned based on the political signals. Planning needs to start earlier. It needs to be part of the calculus. It can no longer be, there needs to be a flexibility element to resilience.
So
Resilience does.
Irina, we just have now a minute left, so I would like
Mhm.
to kind of, sorry to again interrupt you, but I'd like to go to each of the esteemed panelists for last 30-second soundbite, and maybe you can take 40 when your turn comes. So we'll start with you, Pramod. 30 seconds. Sum
Sure. I
up.
think as we know that world is entering where a major power is entering a phase of decline, and we will see more disruption happening. How do we prevent against those disruption outcome is resiliency. Everybody spoke about it, and resiliency is the mantra. Martin spoke about having, how do security sell it to business? How do they voice? I think more importantly, it's resiliency is a tool and something which can be sold to business. But before we do it, we should know what business we are in. Because one of the conference which I was speaking to, and I asked people, how many of you have read your annual report of those publicly listed company? Only 10% security professionals raised their hand that they read their annual report. So if you don't know your business well, you will not be able to sell your resiliency plan well. So
So
very
know your
important.
business well, build resiliency.
And the resiliency is mantra.
Thank you. Great. Alex?
Thank you, Sam. My actual follow on from that is, how do you know your organization? You need to understand, you need to have a risk register, and you need to understand, what are the risks to your organization. It's all very well you can read company reports and things like that. You need to understand your organization at a level where you can see the risks coming down, coming down the path of you. You need to plan. You need to do role play at all levels within the company, involving all levels within the company, to try and combat these risks that you will face at some point.
Brilliant. Risk management is everyone's responsibility. Martin?
Well, I tell you what, if Pramod says that 10% of people have read the annual report, that says to me 90% are incompetent, because it's impossible to do what Alex said unless you've at least got an understanding of what the business is about and where it's going. And, therein lies the challenge, that this is about understanding the context in which security operates. It's not difficult to prevent crime. It's difficult to prevent crime when the context is one in which organizations are live and designed for a different purpose. And therein lies the challenge for good security going forward.
Brilliant. Irina?
Disruptions that the companies are facing today come from actually a very clear set of forces. We're talking about geopolitical crises that can reshape markets overnight, trade wars that change the economics of supply chains midstream, government interventions that can alter access and permissions, and even information shocks that force decisions very quickly. Companies that handle this well will prepare by staying flexible across industries, regions, and operating models. They will avoid structures that only work in one market or one regulatory regime. They will design their capital supply chains and systems that can shift between sectors and jurisdictions, and they build decision authority, which allows them to act early when they see those signals. Effective preparation means building a business that can keep functioning when risk becomes transnational and trans-industry at the same time.
Thank you very much. So my key takeaways, 3 points. Understand the context within which your organization operates. Know your organization well. Risk management is everybody's responsibility. Plan and build your resilience. Being outstanding in security is not a trivial matter. We need to communicate our value proposition well, and disruptions come from a clear set of forces, and they are preventable. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patient hearing, and to my esteemed panelists, Alex, Pramod, Martin, and Irina, a big round of applause. So thank you very much, and back to you, Mrinal.
Thank you. Thank you, SM Kumar. And thank you to all the panelists for a very engaging discussion. Some very fascinating perspectives shared there, and a very fantastic start to today's conversations. We now move to the unveiling of MidCat's EMEA Risk Outlook 2026, followed by demonstration of Data Surfer AI, MidCat's risk intelligence platform. This session will be presented by Anushka Mahanta, Intelligence Manager for America and EMEA, and Abhijit Korde, Product Manager. Anushka and Abhijit, over to you, please.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. First of all, thank you, Mrinal, for the introduction and also for the panel for the very insightful discussion just now. It was great to hear those perspectives, and it really sets the context for what we're about to share here today. As a part of the EMEA Risk Symposium, I'm pleased to introduce two new publications from MidCat, the Europe Risk Outlook 2026 and the Middle East and Africa Risk Outlook 2026. Both reports are designed as practical tools to help organizations better understand the operating environment across these regions and plan more effectively for the year ahead. They focus on how political, regulatory, security, infrastructure, and climate conditions translate into real business implications so teams can make informed and operational and strategic decisions. Starting with the Europe Risk Outlook 2026, this publication provides a structured assessment of the risk environment across Europe and is intended to support strategic planning, operational decision making, and business resilience across the region. The objective is pretty straightforward. It's to give organizations a clearer understanding of the conditions they're operating in, not just from a macro or political perspective, but in terms of how these conditions translate into practical business impact. So over the past year in particular, we have seen increased volatility across the region, from geopolitical tensions and ongoing conflicts to regulatory shifts and infrastructure pressures, all of which are creating a more uncertain and fast-changing business environment. So, this report covers countries across the region and assesses how local conditions may affect business operations in 2026. That includes political and regulatory developments, security and geopolitical exposure, infrastructure and utility reliability, climate and environmental pressures, and localized operational interruptions. So, the report looks at both the broader strategic context and the on ground implications for businesses. Moving on to the Middle East and Africa Risk Outlook 2026, it applies basically the same approach to a different risk landscape. The report focuses on key markets and priority operating environments across the region. In these markets, the environment is often more volatile but also presents significant growth opportunities. Here, the businesses are navigating a mix of political transitions and security dynamics, cross border and political spillovers, infrastructure and logistics constraints, climate and resource stress, and evolving regulatory frameworks. These factors can directly affect supply chains, workforce mobility, site reliability, and overall continuity. So, this report provides a country by country insight that helps organizations assess exposure, understand likely operational impacts, and plan accordingly. So, in both these reports, for each country, the analysis focuses on three key things. The first is the key risk drivers shaping the environment, whether it's political, economic, regulatory, or physical. Second is the likely operational impacts, how these risks affect mobility, supply chains, workforce access, utilities, or compliance requirements. And third, the practical considerations for businesses, what organizations should factor into their planning and continuity strategies. The intention is not to predict crises. It's basically to provide a realistic assumption that teams can use when making decisions about investment, expansion, or ongoing operations. These are designed as working documents. They can support market entry assessments, site selection, supply chain planning, risk and continuity exercises, and broader strategic discussions. So they're meant to be referenced regularly rather than read once and set aside. So, with that, we're pleased to share both the Europe Risk Outlook 2026 and the Middle East and Africa Risk Outlook 2026 with you today. A quick thank you as well to the team who has worked extensively on putting these reports together and my amazing team lead, Bishakha. A lot of effort has gone into research and analysis behind them. We've also shared the links to both the reports in the chat box, and we sincerely hope they provide the useful context and support informed, resilient operations across the region. Thank you so much. Avijit, over to you.
Thank you, Anushka. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the EMEA Risk Symposium 2026. My name is Abhijit, and I'll be taking you through the demonstration of our own risk intelligence solution, Data Surfer GoSafe. I'm sharing my screen. Just allow me a second. Yes, so I'll start with a problem statement. Today, every organization knows where their people are or where there are critical assets are located, but very few know what kind of risk they are exposed to in a real time, and a fewer can actually act on them immediately and communicate effectively if something wrong happens. Now, GoSafe is built particularly for that as a solution. Now, GoSafe is an AI-powered travel and asset risk intelligence platform that basically helps organizations to monitor their personal and critical locations in a real time, assess the exposure to a global risk events, and communicate effectively during the emerging crisis. Now, I'll take you to the actual live application. This is a cloud-based application starting with the GoSafe dashboard. As you can see, this is a command center for travel and asset risk intelligence. At the center, you can see the live global view. Each pin represents either an active traveler or a mapped asset, may it be an office, hotel, or an airport. The color of each pin reflects the risk exposure, dynamically calculated based on the live risk events and the proximity of that asset from that particular event, ranging from very low to very high. On the left, you can see the intelligence layers. Every user can create the customized view based on using these kind of layers as per the operational needs. The layers include different kinds of traveler asset, the earthquake something. You can, if you want to see the earthquakes around the globe, you can just switch on the layer and using the different tools, you can actually map the distance of your asset from that particular event. On right hand side, you can see the action center. Here, arguably the most important part of the platform. This is basically gives you everything that needs the attention of a user. It surfaces automatically at this location. This can encompass alert that is impacting any of the traveler or the asset, newly created itineraries, updated on monitoring topics, or any events that is awaiting action. Now, when I click on any of the event, it basically zooms into that particular event location. Once it is zoomed in, then it shows the impact radius and it also gives you the impacted assets and the travelers within that impact radius. So on left hand side, you can see which of your assets are in the close proximity of that particular event. There is also an option of embedded agentic AI, which you can use to get the deeper insights on that particular event. Now, if this particular event is requires notification to be sent, then the platform also allows you to take action and send notification to the affected travelers or the assets. On top right, you can see the SAM AI, our own embedded AI, which is agentic AI, which is trained on our data. Now, the unique feature of this platform is that with the natural language, you can ask SAM AI if you require anything, such that I'm asking uh, alerts in Australia. So basically, in a natural language, you can ask the questions. The SAM AI understands the intent. It restricts. It basically gets the context and presents the results visually. You can see the result, and it doesn't only stop over there, but you can also take the action of sending notification to the affected traveler directly through the SAM AI. Moving on to the other screens, it also allows a different operational lenses for monitoring. Under monitoring, there are map views where a user can see all the alerts geographically located, and it also allows user to create a customized screen for monitoring. So this is how if you what you can see on your screen is like a customized filter which I have placed that if anything major happens, like suppose my CEO is traveling to a particular location and I want to track the journey or his duration of his journey, I can set that alarm. And once if anything of important event affects my CEO's travel, then I can get the notification like this, which will help me to take the necessary action. Next is the different under monitoring screens. There is a list monitoring. In list monitoring is basically created for a GSOC and a security analyst. This basically lists all the alerts in the format of a structured list. Each alert is tagged with a risk level, impact level. This allows the user it enables it for rapid triage, prioritization, and escalation, especially during the high volume situations. Next is a traveler monitoring, where every user or every traveler is tracked as a dynamic asset. You can know which traveler is on the go, what is the risk exposure to that traveler, and how many events are affecting or taking place in the close vicinity of that traveler. This allows you to track the traveler in a detail, and if necessary, you can also take any necessary actions. Further, there is a screen for itinerary creation. Main purpose of this screen is because risk management should not start when something wrong happens. Now, with this screen, itinerary creation, travel data can be uploaded or directly integrated from your existing systems like different tools like Concur. Once the itinerary is created, every traveler is controlled or enrolled for the monitoring. All the destinations in the itinerary are assessed, and all a user can send the pre-travel advisory to all the travelers before even the travel begins. Now, this allows organizations to plan the safer travels, not just to react to the in a crisis situations. Apart from this, there is also a custom filter. There again, using SAM AI, every user can create a custom subscription just by asking that monitor such a simple question, such as monitor all my assets in Australia for next 10 days. With simple natural language, you can instruct SAM AI to create a customized subscription, and it will provide you the communication once something of importance related to your custom filter happens. This enables a proactive, continuous risk awareness without any trouble of manual setup. It also allows you to get the travel risk rating globally. This basically is created to help organizations to define and enforce travel policies, restrict or approve the travel, and also align the leadership decisions along with the real-time intelligence. It also allows you to override the travel risk ratings, and every organization can set up their own ratings so that all the advisories and alerts are created based on internal travel risk and customized travel risk ratings. Finally, to summarize, I would just like to say that the GoSafe is not just an alerting tool. It is a risk intelligence platform that first dynamically monitors all your travelers and assets. Second, it correlates live global risk data for those travelers. Third, it enables rapid and structured crisis communication and uses agentic AI to simplify all the complex decision making. The result is faster response, clear visibility, and safer travels at enterprise scale. Finally, we would be happy to walk you through a deeper demo or a trial trailer to your organizations. The link is given in the comment box, or you can get in touch with my colleague Kunal Solanki. And if you have any questions related to the tool or how it can, provide a value for you, you can put your question in the Q&A box. I'll be happy to answer that question. Thank you so much. Yeah, back to you, Mrunal.
All right. Thank you, Abhijit and Anushka. I can also say to download the EMEA Risk Outlook, you can click in the link in the chat box. The Risk Outlook would be emailed to you after the event. And to reiterate, for more information on Data Surfer or to book a demo of the tool, please contact Kunal Solanki. His contact details would be available to you in the chat box. So with that, we now begin to our second panel discussion of the day, EMEA Risk and Opportunities Outlook 2026, moderated by Farah London, Regional Director, MidCat Advisory. Farah, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to EMEA Risk and Opportunities Outlook 2026. If my esteemed panelists can all put their cameras on and join us, that would be wonderful. Perfect, wonderful. I have a fantastic panel today. I'm really excited. We're actually going to be bringing you different perspectives with from intelligence, enterprise risk, resilience, critical infrastructure across EMEA. So let me first, before we begin, let's talk about risk. Let's talk about today. I mean, today is no longer a side function. Risk is at the forefront. It's the heart of strategy, investment and decision making. From geopolitical to AI supply chains, ESG, and critical infrastructure, organizations are navigating a far more complex landscape than ever before. But with that complexity comes opportunity for those who are prepared. And that's what we're going to delve in today. And I'll introduce Rachel Spanton. She's a founder and CEO of Victoria Intelligence, an AI developing artificial intelligence tool to help organizations identify, track emerging geopolitical and security threats. She previously spent over a decade at BP, where she built and led the global operation intelligence programs and 24/7 intelligence center, advising on leadership, geopolitical risk across Africa and beyond. So welcome, Rachel. Lovely to have you. And from Africa, from South Africa today, welcome. We have Yolo Sigawaza. Is that correct?
Loyolo Swangaza. Thanks, Farah.
Swangaza. What a beautiful name.
Thank you.
Lolo is a senior enterprise risk manager at Woolworths in South Africa, and he has deep expertise across enterprise risk, internal audit, compliance, and business continuity within the retail sector. He specializes in embedded ERM frameworks, strengthening risk culture, and translating risk insights into strategic value for leadership. Thank you for being here today. And do we have Robert Hutch? Have you joined? I don't think he's here yet. Okay, no problem. We have Peter from the UK, London. Peter Lavery, he's a EMEA and India Regional Security Manager at Gallagher Insurance. And he has over 38 years experience spanning the Royal Military Police and senior corporate security and resilience roles across critical national infrastructure and the private sector. He currently leads pro bono. He leads regional corporate security for Gallagher Insurance, and he holds several pro bono leadership roles supporting UK resilience, including with London Resilience Forum and Security Insight. So I don't know if Hutch has joined, so if someone could reach out to him, that would be wonderful. But today, I'm going to start with you, Rachel, because you've obviously, been at the forefront in different roles that you've done. And how do you feel boards should be thinking differently about intelligence in 2026? Is it still a security function, or is it now a strategic function?
Yeah, thanks, Farah. So I think it's definitely an evolution in the way that boards think about intelligence that I think we should see. So rather than needing to see them completely as like security or strategic, but I think the ones that will get the most value out of their intelligence functions are the ones that understand it can be both, but they're deliberate in we're deliberate and thoughtful in how these teams are positioned and used. And it's also on us as intelligence professionals to help them get there. So in a lot of companies, intelligence sits within security, and that makes a lot of sense. So a large part of Intel's mandate is to keep people safe from violence, unrest, political instability. And so many teams are still largely focused on that model. They monitor for incidents, they write reports, they produce briefs, they kind of support crisis management. And that work is essential, and it always will be. But that's only one aspect of what intelligence is able to do. And in more and more organizations, they now treat intelligence as a strategic enabler as well as a protective function. And so these Intel teams, they still support security, but security is just one of their clients. They also engage with supply chain, strategy, marketing, M&A, and they provide things like forward-looking assessments, regional expertise, or tailored advice on like where the business should operate, when to invest, what risks are emerging before they crystallize into incidents. And I think one of the reasons why this distinction matters is that intelligence is so often perceived unfairly as a blocker. So if the only time that business interacts with the intelligence team is to request a last-minute threat assessment, then the interaction often ends with Intel going like, no, I don't know if you should go there. It seems a bit dangerous. But from a business perspective, this feels like intelligence is bringing bad news and shutting things down. But it's usually just a framing problem rather than a capability problem, because often the underlying question that the business is trying to answer isn't yes or no, can we go? It's how do we grow? How do we make this opportunity viable? And so when intelligence is positioned strategically, the conversation changes. Instead of it being like yes, no, high, medium, low, intelligence can help the business understand, what would need to change for us to operate safely here, or what mitigations could reduce exposure, or what signals should we be looking for that a market is opening up or closing down. And so in that model, intelligence isn't blocking growth, it's enabling kind of safer, more informed expansion. The same analytical skills are being applied, but in a collaborative, forward-looking way that aligns with those business goals. And so the key evolution for boards is that intelligence isn't just about reacting to threats, it's about anticipating disruption and helping to shape decisions, which can be both strategic or security related. And I think that a real important point is that intelligence teams need to help boards get there. So how intelligence is labeled and positioned is so important. So when intelligence is seen as a small subset, like a small shadowy subset of security, then senior leaders often struggle to distinguish its value, and it risks just being viewed as a cost center. But whereas intelligence actively engages the business, speaks the language of decision makers, understands what business needs and what they're trying to do, then it becomes a lot easier for senior leadership to continue justifying investment. So I think in 2026, the question is sort of less, is intelligence a security or a strategic function? But for boards, it should be, are we using intelligence in the right way? Are we extracting its full strategic value? And then for intelligence professionals who want longevity and influence, the challenge for us is to think about that positioning and not abandoning the security mission, but being confident to move beyond it.
I think that's so important what you've actually touched on, because unfortunately, if boards don't understand the importance of intelligence, they can slash budgets. And it's so important that they actually understand, as you've said, it's an integral part and it actually will help the business. So yeah, spot on, absolutely. But welcome. And I believe you're joining us from Nairobi today. We can't hear you, the connection's a bit bad. I think you've got a bad connection, but I'm going to introduce you. If you could try and reconnect again. Hutch is actually Group Head, Corporate Risk at Castro Valley. He's Risk Resilience and Crisis Management Specialist based in Nairobi, and advising investors and business leaders on balancing opportunity with enterprise risk across Africa. And he's a former British Army officer and Africa Business Resilience Director at PwC. He led regional ERM, crisis management programs across multiple countries and supported organizations through complex ESG and regulatory challenges. So hopefully he'll join us back shortly. And I'm actually going to go on to Peter. Hello, Peter. Welcome. Now, you sit at the intersection of corporate security, national resilience. And how has the threat landscape to critical infrastructure evolved in the last 5 years that you've seen?
I think the landscape, as we all know, has changed and evolved significantly. There's a combination of technological advances. Some of those have been mentioned already by other panelists. Geopolitical tensions. I mean, if there's a word that will come out from today, it's that geopolitical piece and how big an impact that has, and the environmental challenges. So, we're seeing increased cyber security threats. I'm not an expert in that area, but certainly from a resilience and a crisis management perspective, we need to be much better and more prepared around that. State, non-state actors, the ransomware was mentioned, making sure we've got the right people, right skill sets, etc. AI has been mentioned clearly as one of those tools that the bad actors are using, and arguably we're using as well, but they're definitely using those tools at pace. Aging and overburdened infrastructure, much of our infrastructure within any given nation arguably was probably done decades ago, underinvested and being stressed and strained. If you look at things like March of last year in the UK, when Heathrow was shut down due to a fire at a substation impacting 200,000 passengers directly, but the knock-on effect of those types of infrastructure risks obviously go around the globe. You've got aircraft out of position, crews out of position, and so on and so forth. So they have a massive sort of issue, and that particular fault for that substation was known about for 7 years. So again, underinvestment and all the rest of it. Extreme weather. Okay, again, impacting our systems. And I know this is certainly a UK example. Southeast Water, going out and not providing water to homes and businesses in a large geographic area for 7 days is a massive impact. And probably more globally, the Panama Canal drought of 2023, 2024, restricting shipping and messing with the supply chain and so on and so forth. So again, it's all that. The geo sort of economic confrontations, you look at, and it's been in the news over the last number of years, the sort of, should we say, the messing with the subsea cables. 98% of the world's communications is run through those cables, whether not it's the fiber optics in under your pavements, under your streets, or the fiber optic cables on the bottom of the sea. You have bad actors doing things. You might have a belligerent Russian captain not pulling up his sea anchor as he moves across your coastline and drags up your cables, or arguably ramming another fuel tanker because it's carrying avgas for US forces in the UK doing strikes elsewhere. So these are big issues around the infrastructure at the moment. Scarcity of rare earth materials. There's a lot of impacts that obviously continue to reign throughout that piece. And we're going to see more of it. It's not something that's going away. It's arguably getting bigger. There was reference earlier on to this sort of fractured world and the fractured geopolitics. You're hearing things like this multi-sphere element. These things are happening all over the world at the end of the day. And we need more of that risk management and that public-private partnership, in order to actually deal with a lot of these threats, whether or not you're in a corporate or anywhere else. But that resiliency piece, I think I've got it written down from earlier on that Sir Robert said earlier on, resilience is designed, not improvised. There's still a lot of businesses, a lot of individuals out there that are doing it, so we say incorrectly and not necessarily fully planning it out, because when it does happen, you will have a seismic impact to your business.
It's spot on what you said. The government and the private sector really need to work hand in hand. And what you're talking about, the water company, it actually affected one of my friends, and he actually didn't have water for 2 weeks before Christmas. And that meant all the businesses were closed, all the restaurants, all the schools. So yeah, it is something that is a big disaster that is happening here in the UK in particular. So thank you for that valuable insight. Lula, you specialize in embedding ERM into business culture. And what's the biggest mistake that you've seen that organizations are making when they're trying to implement ERM?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon from South Africa. Thank you so much, Farah, for that great question. And in fact, from the first panel, I think Alex answered this question for me, partly when he said, it's all about culture. He said, risk should be part of what everyone does. And I think from my perspective, the biggest mistake and what I've seen, it's insufficient embedding of risk thinking, which is a mindset across the organization, in decision making, in people behaviors, and just the day-to-day running of the operations. And this actually shows up in a number of ways in the organization. So, for example, one of the ways it's around risk ownership and accountability. I always say this, that as enterprise risk management, we don't own a risk. However, we own the practice of risk management. And I think that needs to be very clearly articulated in the organization around risk ownership and accountability. And also an area which I think, it's not being effectively applied. It's around risk appetite and really embedding risk appetite in day-to-day decision making. I mean, it should be part, and it should be part of the decision making. And I think another critical but important point is around enterprise risk management being positioned as an essential value driver for the organization. What I've seen is that there's too much administrative activities, such as compiling risk registers. I'm not saying that's wrong. There is a place for that, collecting information. But what needs to be realized is that risk, it's a strategic function that supports decision making, and also that limited linkage with the strategy and the value creation capitals of the organization. And what I often see as well is that there's too much focus us around what can go wrong instead of enabling the organization to pursue opportunities, in a risk-informed way. And that for me, I think it's very crucial. And one of the points also which was touched, and my last point, which was touched in the first panel, was around siloed risk management. I mean, risk management cannot operate in a vacuum, especially in today's interconnected, and I mean, Peter touched on the number of risks in today's interconnected, where one risk can actually amplify or trigger other risks. And so risk interdependence becomes very, very crucial and an integrated manner of managing risk in the organization. So Farah, from my perspective, those are just my insights. Thanks.
I absolutely love your passion, your expertise, and you're absolutely right. It's about ownership. We don't take ownership or accountability. So thank you so much for that. Hutch, welcome back. We've got you.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and
Brilliant.
clear. I can see
Brilliant.
you. So welcome. Are you currently in Nairobi?
No, I'm in Lagos. So
Lagos.
yeah.
Lovely Lagos.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. Now, you obviously work with investors and you're balancing opportunities with risk across Africa. And what risks are often overestimated and which ones are dangerously underestimated, in your opinion?
Sure. And again, Farah, thank you so much to Mitkat and to you for hosting this and for coordinating the discussion. What is overestimated? There's a lot of emphasis when investors consider Africa, first and foremost, to discuss corruption, but to discuss corruption in a vacuum as to why it exists, what it exists, how it manifests. And there's a focus on certain types of corruption, as opposed to understanding the environment within which corruption can flourish. It's not an overestimation. It's not to say that it doesn't exist clearly, because I'm in Africa, I'm an African, and I do understand that it does exist. But it's in what context it exists and how can it be used, how can it be seen as an impediment to an investment decision. Whereas an understanding of the basis of where that challenge comes from enables business to get ahead of the challenge and the problem. I think linked to that is the fusion of intelligence and risk. So what does it mean to a strategy to be well informed? And I think people and organizations often focus on specific areas of risk and not risk integration, not the confluence of risk. So if you look at risk 1 and risk 3 on risk register, you look at them as individual risk vectors, as opposed to the convergence of risk 1 and 3. And what does that then manifest as for a business? So the convergence risk, the fusion and intelligence behind decision-making, I think are, as has just been said, siloed in a 21st century environment. And then what is underestimated? I think third-party risk management, again, is cursory. Oftentimes, people are keen to get deals done and do a cursory assessment of third parties. Linked to that are partnerships. In order to get beyond the corruption component, entities do vet their potential partners, particularly critical partners. But then once they pass that vetting stage, it is assumed that they're always going to be good for it, inverted commas. And they don't continue to vet. The continued assessment of that relationship, that business relationship, I think needs to be reconsidered on continued vetting basis. Linked to that is people risk, often underestimated, both internally and externally. And here I come to an issue regarding, what I often talk to boards and governments and individuals, leaders about, is the aspiration to attainment ratio. What are your people aspiring towards? What are their legitimate aspirations? Do you understand those legitimate aspirations? And do you understand the route to attainment of those aspirations? And where there is a gap or a delta between aspiration and attainment, between the legitimate aspirations of your people within the organization and the aspirations of the people in the communities you serve, and the ability to attain those aspirations or have a route to those aspirations, you will have conflict. Now, that conflict may manifest itself as in a physical way, in the physical domain, or it may manifest itself as an internal risk to the business. So those are really some areas which I would like to focus on, or I ask people to focus on in terms of overestimation, underestimation of risks that could impact business growth and strategy. Thanks.
I think that's really, really spot on, because people need to actually invest organizations have to invest in their people. And you're right. Do they actually know the aspirations of their people? Where do they want to go? So yeah, that's really, really insightful. Thank you so much, Hutch. I'm going to jump to you, Peter, because you brought a really interesting topic about where the UK's gone wrong with critical infrastructure. So what lessons from London's resilience planning should private organisations across EMEA actually be adopting or learning from?
I mean, UK has some good practice. There'll be many countries that have good practice as well, but it's not universal in relation to how countries and businesses sort of tackle resilience. Now, in the UK, we've got a piece of primary legislation called the Civil Contingencies Act 2004. It's been revised over time, and it sets forth basically how we deal with emergencies in this country. And across the UK, we have local resilience forums. If you think of one for every county, London is the biggest by far for obvious reasons. I sit on the business sector panel and recently have taken over as chair. But the legislation covers primarily Cat 1 and Cat 2 responders. Cat 1 will be anything with the blue light on. Cat 2 responders are typically our utilities companies. Energy, telecommunications, water, you name it, they're on it, because invariably when we have major emergencies, and to the point that Hutch made, there are cascading failures. When something happens, when there's a flood event happening, there are second, third, fourth order sort of impacts down the line. People in their homes, there are vulnerable people in the communities, and so on and so forth. So I've been doing this for the last 7 years. One of the things I think we can learn and can be pushed out to others is making sure, and risk registers have been mentioned sort of several times already, but it surprises me how many businesses, whilst they may look at their own risks, don't look at their risk register in relation to the national risk register, maybe the London risk register, which obviously focuses in a bit more on London-based risks, the Thames River, the flooding potentially, and so on and so forth, and don't cross-reference those, and make sure that their risk register actually is supported by other risk registers. It'll help inform your own risk-making decisions. There are also a number of framework documents that have already been done to cover off some of the sort of bigger impacts. So cyber's been mentioned, flooding, power outages, telecommunication outages. So there are framework documents that are already setting out what that emergency response is, but there's a lot of people that are in resilience in businesses and in corporates that don't necessarily reference back to those because they are a good source of information. As an example, some types of large cyber type events, obviously they are national events. It might be in London, but it's going to be our national agencies that deal with it. You are no longer in control. I think one of the pieces that I found in some businesses I've worked in the past is they don't necessarily look at those other emergency response plans and realize that, in a major emergency, in a declared sort of major incident, they're no longer in control. They're used to making decisions and the business and people jump to. But actually, if your business is impacted, and use the City of London as an example, if there's a large cordon around whatever that incident is, you're no longer in command and control of your business. The emergency services will be directing you to do certain things. And a lot of those emergency response plans and those resiliency plans haven't factored in those other plans and what they will do to your plan. So you think you're going to do A and B, but in fact, you'll end up doing X and Y. And that's not what you planned for. It's not what you exercised and tested. I think exercising is clearly one of those big ones. I know lots of people say, we do exercise and test our plans, and I'm sure they do. It's got to reference back, and it was mentioned by the previous speaker about risk registers probably a bit more. But if you're going to do risk-based scenarios and all the rest of it, it's got to tie back to your risks, your business risks, because otherwise the scenario is not realistic. It's not something you're likely to potentially face. So if you can tie it into your business, and I think the reference was made to whether or not it was an inside job in relation to Arup and all the rest of it. If that's what you see as a potential risk, then making sure that you tabletop exercise that type of thing. And if you are a company that travels to certain parts of the world with international travelers, you need to be thinking about kidnap and ransom related risks. And are you exercising and testing those? Are you exercising and testing those with your risk partners? It's invariably likely that you will have a responding party. Maybe it's through your insurance. Maybe it's you've done it directly with a business, and there are lots out there, and not just MitCat and things like this, but that can help you respond to those types of issues. So, have you exercised and tested with them? Have you exercised and tested with your supply chain or your critical suppliers in particular? And if you come from a regulated environment, I do, obviously, with the finance sector, there's a lot of regulation on top that makes it really clear about what the expectation is on yourself. And I think Sir Robert sort of talked a lot about the sort of regulatory sort of elements and the impacts they have within business. And then lastly, just to end up that we have in the UK, again, a document that the emergency services use called JESIP, and that's the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Principles. And again, businesses need to know what those are. And it doesn't matter if you're in India, there'll be a variation of the theme, there'll be something, or elsewhere in Europe, there'll be something. But you need to understand what those are and what that impact will be on your plan going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So those are the types of things that, can be transported from country to country and further into EMEA, certainly.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid point that, you have to factor in that the emergency services will have their own plans as well. So you do need to be prepared. That's a really valid point. A lot of companies actually don't think about that. Rachel, now, as we all know, there's lots of AI tools out there, but what are the geopolitical or security signals that your AI tools are picking up now the most, which or other organizations are still missing?
Yeah, so I think I think it's definitely less about specific signals and more about types of signals. So I think one of the areas that AI tools are really well primed to excel and to support intel and security teams is picking up weak signals that something is changing that might otherwise go under the radar. So, these are things that typically might not make, international news or even kind of like national news, and maybe in isolation they don't mean a whole lot, but when you take them together, they point towards the underlying conditions of a country are shifting. So most organizations are like really good at picking up events, like they can pick up that there are protests happening or attacks or like coups or sanctions, but where they often struggle is tracking longer term structural fragility and then also recognizing like subtle early signals that a situation is changing. And that is not a failure of capability at all. It's just more a capacity thing. Like intel teams are stretched. They have like a limited number of people often covering like really broad areas. And so that's where I think AI tools add a lot of value, is just not by just like predicting what's going to happen, but continuously monitoring, like wading through the noise, connecting dots that might otherwise be missed, and then like continually kind of updating, threat assessments or likelihood scores or things like that in the background in a way that if you had a team of, 100 analysts working on a country, they might be able to do, but, most companies don't have that. And I use like an example that's sort of to highlight how these weak signals can come together. So Madagascar in late 2025 when they saw the coup. So Madagascar was already like structurally quite fragile. So there's weak governance, limited state capacity, like high poverty, long-standing public frustration. So none of that was new. And these conditions were kind of chronic rather than acute. So they, largely faded into the background for a lot of people's monitoring, and especially for like overstretched intelligence teams trying to understand where things might be really deteriorating. But if you have AI tools, like especially machine learning driven forecasting models, they can continually track and reweight all those baseline factors to highlight if anything's changing. And then also what you saw in Madagascar was a interaction between those long-term underlying stressors and then highly localized stressors that again wouldn't necessarily be reported anywhere but hyperlocal sources. So, things like persistent water shortages or rolling power outages, or like just sharpening like grievances about the state of things. And again, these are things that when you look back, you're like, okay, those were there, the signals were there, but they're just really hard to pick up as individuals. And so none of these things in isolation probably would have triggered like a warning or an alert in lots of systems. But when you kind of stack them with the underlying fragility and you kind of see how these things are just adding over time, then suddenly it points to a situation where, things could actually deteriorate here quite rapidly. And then the stage where most, analysts are able to take notice is when things are already happening. So like protests have turned violent, or, police forces are firing on protesters, or like protesters have died. And at that point, it's not like it's too late to react, obviously, but you've lost a window of time to react because things are already kicking off, and you've, then your options are a bit more limited in terms of what you can do. So I think where AI tools add real value is helping to surface those low-level kind of early warning signals that can tell an organization that something is changing, and then in the background kind of continually tracking that change to update teams. So rather than having to wait for, one high impact trigger that we can track and identify and respond to. So it's not necessarily that you could ever predict that, like a coup is going to happen on this specific date, but you can kind of more easily show that the temperature that would make a coup or like violent civil unrest more likely is heating up. And then that gives companies early warning systems. So I think that's one area that AI adds a lot of value, is just that continual background monitoring and like forecasts that learn over time, and then also being better able to identify those low level signals that might otherwise be missed.
Yeah, and I think something you said earlier, which really was important, is obviously AI itself is a great intelligence tool, but it's really important to have the analysts also behind that. So that human integration. And yes, I'm very biased. That's why I love Data Surfer, because it's not just an AI tool. We have human intelligence combined together. And I think that's so important. And a lot of AI tools are missing that combined knowledge of humans as well, because we still need to be relevant. And actually wanted to ask Hutch, from your experience in resilience and crisis management, what do you feel separates organizations that survive major incidents and those that frankly don't?
Yeah, Farah, that's such a great question, and really got me to think through a number of crises that I've worked with businesses with and some governments with, and it's fascinating. The short answer, in case my internet cuts off, is something that my colour sergeant would say to me when I was at Sandhurst and say to our platoon, and has been said by countless senior NCOs, which is prior preparation and planning leads to prior preparation and planning leads to prevention of poor performance. I'm missing a P there, which is an expletive deliberately. So those organizations that have made plans, that have understood what needs to be done, how it integrates to their strategy, their strategic outcomes, are those organizations that tend to survive. Those organizations that understand their center of gravity are those organizations that tend to survive. And what do I mean by center of gravity? This refers to their critical enablers, critical vulnerabilities, and critical requirements. If organizations have invested their time in understanding the relationship between their strategic objectives and their critical enablers, critical vulnerabilities, and critical requirements, then they invest in a process and a way of thinking around the protection of those criticalities and how those criticalities can be used to support their outcomes. And then investing in scenario planning, scenario development, scenario execution in terms of how they test those scenarios. But more important, and to Rachel's point, is monitoring key risk indicators and understanding that whatever your plans are don't exist in isolation, nor do they exist on paper purely in an environment where things are moving consistently. And the agility of thought is perhaps amongst leadership teams is perhaps the greatest differentiator. Yes, we have a plan. Yes, we have resourced it. But do you have agile leaders who think critically around problems and focus on outcomes, focus on what are we trying to be when we get out of this? That horrible phrase, build back better, which is awful, but nonetheless represents a process of thought regarding where are we trying to get to as aligned to our strategy. I think linking to that, who survives? Rachel mentioned and has been mentioned before the chronic and the acute, and within Africa in particular, there's competition consistently regarding the chronic and the acute. Governments are dealing with this simultaneously. Organizations are dealing with this simultaneously. And there's a need to understand the difference between the chronic and acute. Where does this matter the most during a crisis? When I speak to leaders and to businesses, I talk about the time paradox. And what does that mean? It means you have both less and more time than you think you do. And that sounds slightly odd, but what does that mean? It means how you use time to determine your outcome will determine where you invest your time. And if you make the mistake of poor investment of time, you will find yourself cut short pretty quickly. So those organizations that understand the criticality of their business lines, of their lines of effort, of their critical vulnerabilities, requirements, and enablers, and then test them and monitor the key risk indicators are the organizations that, in my view, have the best chance of surviving. And then finally, and this is going to sound slightly weird, I suppose, I spent a decade of my life in the military. I spent my decade of my life with some very interesting individuals, should I say. But all of those individuals who were exceptional leaders were leaders who were comfortable in their own skin, who had been trained and tested in environments which were pretty harsh. I had then worked in a number of organizations, and these organizations tend to be led by men. And men without testing and having the comfort of being tested in safety then exhibit high testosterone behavior under stress. And I've seen more aggression around a boardroom than I've ever seen in conflict, in planning. And that to me was a huge learning curve between my military career and my civilian career, is that when you have predominantly high-powered men around a table dealing with the crisis, testosterone flies everywhere. And so we need to create environments for those leaders to feel comfortable about being challenged by younger people, by females, in order for them to get the best out of the team that they lead, as opposed to having all the answers in the team that they are leading. And I think that's a really important determinant factor, for organizations that have a chance of succeeding or failing during the course of a crisis. Thanks, Farah.
I really, really love that comparison. It actually is quite scary. It's very true, absolutely true. And, talking about the boards, those senior officials at the top, Rachel obviously talked earlier, about the importance of boards and understanding risk intelligence. Now, Lulu, I want to speak to you because in your role, how do you ensure risk insights actually influence executive decision making at the board level rather than becoming the compliance exercise for them?
Thank you so much, Farah. That's a great question. Because if executives can't see how the risk insights helps them make a decision, it will become the compliance exercise which you've described. So I believe risk insights will influence the executives when they are aligned to the strategy and what is actually threatening the strategy execution. And also, of course, with insights means you work with the data, internal as well as external data. And the point that I always raise is that data must be used in a way that it is contextualized into the risk intelligence. That's context. It's very, very critical. And also that focus on material risk as well as emerging risk and telling a clear story about the impact and choices. For example, in my organization, so I take deep dives very seriously, deep dives on emerging as well as trending and material risks. So in each deep dive, we actually ensure that the so what, it is so critical. You always need to answer the so what. What impact could it be? Over what time frame? And also engaging the business on the responses and what options leadership actually has. Now, there's something which I'm very passionate about, and I believe that there is a place for it, and that's storytelling. And I will always advocate that. And the reason I advocate it is because good risk management, it's about telling the right story that is going to drive engagement and action. And in fact, it's about connecting risk, connecting the enterprise data and outcomes in a way that executives can quickly grasp and act on. I usually say, when you produce a board report, does it drive engagement? Does it drive action? And does it position you in that way as a risk professional? And of course, and lastly, I'm fortunate enough to be subscribed to MidCat. And of course, MidCat gives me real-time alerts and giving me the ability to proactively manage and anticipate emerging risks across the board spectrum, and then using those insights, of course, back to the business and with my executives. Thank you so much, Farah.
No, thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. Everything you said is absolutely correct. So I really, really loved your insights there. Rachel, in 2 minutes, actually, if you could sum this up. We often see intelligence sit in silos. So how often do you translate threat intelligence to something operational leaders and risk teams can actually act on?
Yeah, I can do it in 2 minutes because I feel like I don't want to go over things other people have
We've got
said.
perfect timing. Do not worry. Take your 2 minutes.
Awesome. So yeah, I think one of the things to start is just to build really strong relationships with those leaders, with those customers, so you can actually understand like what they need, and I think it was mentioned on the first panel as well about really needing to understand the business strategy and business priorities. So making sure that you're keeping up to date like on that, so you kind of know what to expect. Is just that helps you get ahead of any future problems, and you can also kind of preempt what's useful rather than just what's going on in the world. And then I think as well, it's really important. It sounds really basic, but just to understand how your customers want their information given to them. So if you're trying to get things out in a way that, oh gosh, sorry, my cat's just knocking over my laptop. So it's kind of important to sort of know how you can have the most impact with your intelligence and with your reports. So is that you have a leader that wants everything in a brief, or you have everything they want it in an email? Like, again, knowing that ahead of time just helps make sure that you can get your stuff across with impact rather than just producing long reports that no one reads. And then I think as well, spending time after the fact to kind of review, okay, so did that information actually land? Did they act on it? Why didn't they act on it? How can we improve that in the future? Like that constant review process, which I think we all know is really difficult because generally feedback is just a blank stare and like a empty inbox. But I think doing that is a really valuable thing because again, that helps us continually make sure that we're not sitting in a silo. We're translating that risk intelligence into a format that people can actually act on. So yeah, I don't know if that's 2 minutes, but I'll stop there.
No, that's perfect. Absolutely perfect. Now, Hutch, I have been fortunate to travel to Africa. I fell in love. I like to call it Mother Africa. And what I love about Africa is the opportunities in Africa. And I'm always screaming, from the heavens to everyone, you must invest in Africa. And I wanted to pick on your expertise here. Now, for 2026, where do you see the biggest investment opportunities are in Africa? Organizations, they're too nervous to pursue. So, tell them, what's the opportunities in Africa?
Farah, thank you so much. Part of the reason I left the army as a major post-staff college and all the rest of it was to come home because I recognize like many, of course, the opportunities across the region. And that is a core area of focus for me, is to support investors to making decisions that allow them to invest comfortably across the region. And at Castavali, just as a start, we are an Africa-focused organization that are working with our partners, with our stakeholders, to identify those opportunities, to inform, protect, and secure their assets, their people, their brand, so that they can be comfortable with investing across the region. And so I choose four. There are multiple, of course, but I'll choose four areas. One is value addition. So whether that's in the mining sector or in agriculture, there's a huge amount of opportunity there for investors. I'll come back to why that investment is not happening, because I think that's also important so you don't whitewash or greenwash the issue. But in terms of, to answer your question directly, value addition, and it's something that's been cried out for across the region. Why are we exporting raw materials? Why can't we add value and to gain value from those resources in a greater way? That's a huge area. The second is logistics, storage, cold storage. Again, in order to maximize the ability to export finished goods and to increase the shelf life of those goods as we export them, but also intra-Africa trade to enable trade within the region so that the numbers, which are pathetic, frankly, across the region in terms of intra-Africa trade, can be increased. And there's organizations like the Trademark Africa that are working hard to increase the through flow of business and to reduce the administrative burden of cross-border transactions. But in order for that to work, you still need the logistic chains to enable that to happen, including cold chain storage. The third is energy and infrastructure. Again, these are vital areas of concern. And of course, you're focused, I'm in Lagos at the moment, I'll be across West Africa, I live in Nairobi, etc. So you're focusing on cities, large cities. Dar es Salaam is going to be a mega city by 2050, as an example. So would Lagos. But what about areas beneath, beyond Lagos, beyond the capital cities that connect and enable lives to flourish, for businesses to grow beyond capital cities, and the level of infrastructure development that is required? So you haven't got the crowding into mega urban centers, but I have a diffusion of that capability enabled by technology, enabled by infrastructure, enabled by energy. And then sports, entertainment, and tourism. Huge contributor to the African economies are the abilities for investors to tap into sports, entertainment, and tourism, because of what they represent as an opportunity for both intra-Africa, but also global brand growth and identification, and exporting our rich culture and heritage beyond our borders, beyond villages, frankly, into the world and beyond. And a huge emphasis, I think, there, an opportunity which I think has been seized on by the NBA, for example, across Africa, by Netflix, by Spotify, who are looking for these opportunities to grow their brands and understand the richness and diversification across the border. Very briefly, why isn't it happening? Because I think that's equally important. Investors, generally speaking, are after three things. They're after the rule of law and sanctity of contract. They're after security, both physical and digital security. And they're after human capital. Where you have an interplay between those three circles in the Venn diagram, that sweet spot are the countries that attract investment and retain investment. But you may have a very good story to tell, but do not have the rule of law and sanctity of contract. The capital inflow is not coming. You may have security, as you do in certain parts of Africa, and in whatever format, but you don't have that rule of law and you haven't got the human capital. Investment is going to struggle. And so you need, from a policy level, in terms of the sweat equity that governments need to place here, is to create the environment to enable private sector to make the decisions to invest by addressing those three things. And yes, it sounds reasonably simple, but it's bloody hard work, as we all know. But where the investment is in, rule of law and the sanctity of contract, where the investment is in terms of security, where the investment is in terms of human capital, those environments will flourish. And then you will have a concomitant level of investment and interest from capital to invest in those regions.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you, Hutch. I love exporting the village to the world. I really, really appreciate that. Lalula, I want to talk about third party and supplier risk. It's a major issue that we have across EMEA. And what does good third party risk management look like in practice, in your opinion?
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'll try to be very succinct in answering that question, given the time. Yes, given the time. But maybe I think it would be helpful, before answering what good third-party risk management looks like, I think it would be helpful to reflect on what good doesn't look like. And I'll come back to your question quickly. So what I'm about to say, it doesn't apply to all organizations, but it is common for third party to be fragmented. And particularly because third-party relationships, the ownership and the processes, they actually spread across the organization, across the multiple business units. So, and each business unit is managing risk through their lens. Now, my belief is that without a unified and integrated framework, no one will have visibility of the full third-party risk picture. So in practice, and what I have done, of course, is to put in place a group-wide framework. And this framework really considers, amongst other things, ownership, roles and responsibility, criticality of your suppliers, the risk tiering of your suppliers, the minimum standards and the controls around managing third-party life cycle, from contracting to onboarding, etc. And also something that I've been really driving, it's that single source of the truth. that consolidated view of third-party risk across a number of domains, not just maybe cyber or security, but from reputational to business continuity. I mean, a whole list of domains. And the challenge is that in order for you to get that risk profile view of a supplier, you would need to extract the information across these multiple data sources. And so the power of having that single source of the truth, in my opinion, it's very, very important. Just some of the insights, Farah, that I wanted to share in the limited time.
That was perfect, absolutely perfect. So thank you so much. Now, Peter, how do you ensure businesses are actually truly prepared for crisis rather than just, like having a plan on a piece of paper?
Obviously, I've mentioned some of that already. Obviously, and so again, in the interest
You
of time,
touched on that.
Again, it's exercising and testing and maturity over time. You might be a young business, you might have an experienced team, but you need to mature them over time in relation to how complex and how should we say difficult some of those crises could be to manage. I mean, Hutch actually referenced the militarisms and the testosterone, all the rest of it. Now, having people that have the skills to deal with crises. Not everybody, and I'll reference, I suppose, back to BP, putting your big boss up there and saying something wrong in a disaster will have, quite big impact on your organization and all the rest of it. So having the right people in your crisis management team and not always the business leadership, but having the right people, testing and exercising them, putting them under pressure, taking them out of their comfort zone. It's been referenced, and I love it. Again, chronic or acute incidents, chronic pandemics, long time. Let's face it, we've dealt with it years. You can have a cyber incident that can run for months. Ransomware, whatever it might be. Depending on the complexity of it. But you look at Rolls-Royce, at M&S, outages for quite some time, supply chain, the impacts, stopping production, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got to be able to sort of over time put them through the paces in a different way and an imaginative way, and it's got to tie back in again to your own risks and all the rest of it, but bearing in mind the other risk registers and the other impacts and those emergency services as well. So, I mean, pandemic again, I'm re-exercising that in the UK. It's been running over a number of months, not from a business perspective, but from a London resilience and a UK perspective, because sadly that risk hasn't gone away. Zoonosis or zoonotic, transfer of an infectious disease from animals to humans. What if next time, rather than, should we say, the more senior members of our our society that are impacted, it's children, because it's different and it attacks different things. What if it starts to impact your pets? Rachel's got a cat. I've got a cat. It hasn't knocked the computer, thankfully. But if domestic pets were a risk factor for the next pandemic, what does that do to us humans and all the rest of it? How do we sort of react differently and all the rest of it? So I wrap it up by just saying that, exercising, but complexity, getting in your partners, bring in the emergency services. If you've got a particular site, you've got a manufacturing site that's particularly vast, you want to exercise with those emergency services for obvious reasons. But it's just ramping it up over time, maturing over time, and being able to, especially in a regulatory environment, be able to evidence all of that, because they're going to want to see it.
Thank you, Peter. As we're coming to the end, I want to give you all 30 seconds to give our audience a key takeaway for EMEA Risk for 2026. So I'm going to start with you, Lululo. Please, 30 seconds. What's your takeaway?
My key takeaway is that if I reflect from an Africa perspective, and as Hutch said, it's a continent that's full of opportunities, but also risks are real. And they translate into immediate operational impact. And so institutional resilience and adaptability, it's very, very crucial. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Rachel, in 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I think just reflecting what we've spoken about, I think it's so important for internal security functions to really own the narrative around how we're viewed internally and the benefit we can add to our organizations, or else we end up being pigeonholed as just sort of yes, no, blockers. And so I think as well, like to give back to what Peter said, like focusing on us as opportunity enablers rather than just sort of like tick boxes and things like that, I think is really important. And we have to be the ones driving that. We can't expect businesses to suddenly kind of come around to the value we can provide.
Thank you. Hutch, 30 seconds. What do you have for me?
Understand your strategy in context and then focus on how realistically you can make that work and build the teams around you in order to develop and execute on your strategic objectives. Thanks.
Thank you. And Peter?
Okay, I'm going to mention some of the same things. The context of the business, cross-functional teams, and making sure that you know each other, before the crisis, you're not meeting each other for the first time in a crisis, is really important. And I'll go back to that piece around resilience by design. Okay, business continuity, crisis management, resilience, lots of different buzzwords, lots of different cross-functional teams getting together, but by design, not through, should we say, winging it and a prayer.
And I wanted to just quote some amazing things from my actual panelists. Rachel earlier, she said, intelligence teams need to help boards get there. I really like that. And Lululo, you said something really interesting, which was insufficient embedding of risk culture. We don't own risk. If we don't own risk, we own risk practice management. So that's really powerful. And Peter, I like this one because it was about risk registers. They help inform risk-making decisions. So it's very vital that you cross-reference your risk registers, which isn't being done. So I think that's really important. And Hut, so one thing, you're absolutely right. You need to continue to vet business relations because you're right, it's done at the start and not continually. And this was really beautiful. Do you understand the aspirations of your people? I think that's a really powerful takeaway. So thank you. A big round of applause to our incredible panelists. And I look forward to the next panel.
Thanks, Farah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Farah, and thank you to all the panelists for those valuable insights. A very relevant discussion for organizations operating across EMEA region. We now move to our third and the final panel discussion of the day, intersection of technology, travel security, executive protection, resilience, and duty of care, moderated by Sushil Pradhan, Executive Director and COO of MidCat Advisory. Over to you, Sushil.
Thank you, Mrinal, and again, a very good afternoon, good morning, Bruce, to you, and good day to the rest of the people. So I have the onerous responsibility of conducting and moderating the last panel for the day, but I assure everyone this is going to be the most exciting panel of the day. So thank you all for joining us, and we are going to talk about something. So the first panel spoke at a slightly higher level about the risks at the macro level and the geopolitical level and the human level. The second panel spoke about managing risks, and that is something which we found some wonderful takeaway from the practitioners. What we are going to talk about in this panel is basically about the intersection of technology, travel security, executive protection, resilience, duty of care, with reference to the EMEA region. So when we talk about these things, we often discuss them as separate functions, but in reality, they actually collide in real terms and often, under pressure and increasingly so across borders. And the EMEA region especially brings this intersection into sharp focus. We are dealing with geopolitical tension, conflict spillover, protests, terrorism, cyber disruption, regulatory complexity, and constant employee mobility, very often all at once. And technology has really become central to organizations managing these risks, but technology alone doesn't make the decisions, the people do. So today's discussion is not just about tools, it's about how leaders combine technology, intelligence, and human judgment to protect their people, enable their business travel, and meet duty of care obligations without paralyzing the organization or creating a hype about high risk. We'll explore how technology genuinely helps, where it creates new risks, and how organizations can build resilience that works, not just on paper, but when something goes wrong at 2 a.m. in a different time zone. So with that, let's begin with the discussion. But before that, I would like to introduce my eminent panelists to you. So in no particular sequence, so we have Lloyd Figgins joining us. Lloyd, hello.
He's the CEO of the Trip Group, and it's a global travel risk management community, a former overseas security advisor to the UK government, briefing ambassadors, ministers, and senior officials on risk to life in high risk environments. He brings a huge experience across 80 plus countries, and he's been a media commentator, keynote speaker, author on global risks and crisis management. We are very happy to have him with here. I've been personally listening to him speak for over a decade now at various forums, and truly impressive. Thanks, Lloyd. We have Matthew Leckie. Matt is the corporate security manager for UK and EMEA for Zebra Technologies. And he's a corporate security professional with 18 plus years of international experience, currently leading Zebra Technologies for the region. And his background spans physical and travel security, technical security, investigations, crisis management, and executive protection, with prior experience in loss prevention and close protection roles as well. Thanks, Matt, for joining us. We have Hussein. Hussein is CEO of Chronox, which delivers tailored risk mitigation, executive protection, investigations, and travel security for high net worth individuals and multinational clients across the Middle East and Africa. Frequently engaged as a regional subject matter expert, he advises on political risk, due diligence, and corporate security, and is regularly quoted in international media on regional security development. So great to have him with us here as well. Pranoti Surve is the Global Security and Risk Management Executive. Most recently, she was the head of global security programs at Philip Morris International, leading security and management initiatives for 70,000 plus employees across 80 plus countries. With more than 15 years of experience across Meta and Bank of America, she's built and scaled threat intelligence, crisis response, enterprise risk resilience frameworks with a short and a strong focus on intelligence-led and human-centered security. So thank you for joining us, Pranoti. And last but not the least, the one person who's really woken up early morning to join us here is Bruce McIndo, the president of McIndo Risk Advisory and our senior advisory for MidCat. Former founder of iJet and World Aware, and a global thought leader in risk management, OSINT, and geopolitical intelligence. He's also the creator of the continuous risk management model and the TRM maturity model adopted by GBTA. Former OSINT pioneer, he's got experience across NSA, CIA, Department of Defense, and the NASA in the US. And he's recognized amongst BTN's top 25 most influential security professionals. Thanks, Bruce, also for joining us, and thank you for being awake so early to be part of our panel. Bruce, are you there? Yes. Yes, I can see you. Okay, great. So guys, let's get off to a start. And ladies first, let me start with Pranoti. Pranoti, you've been associated with various risk management programs across the region. And the EMEA region especially spans from stable West European capitals to serious conflict zones in the Middle East and various parts of Africa. How have you been adapting executive protection protocols across such diverse risk environments while maintaining very consistent duty of care standards?
First of all, let me thank everybody at MidCat for inviting me to join this panel. It's very nice to be here and share this panel with these wonderful co-panelists. And Sushil, thanks for moderating this very interesting session. I think something you touched on at the very beginning in your opening comments was around thinking about some of these things before the events actually occur, right? And I think this is, to me, the core premise of managing and responding to events that are occurring. I think there is no question that for quite some time, security managers have learned to live in a world of an omni-crisis, a perma-crisis, so very many different adjectives to describe what is essentially everything everywhere all at once, right? And the only way to be prepared for everything everywhere all at once is to focus on the preparation component, right? What I recommend and I encourage most organizations to look at is actually to prepare their procedures, the preparedness for their travelers themselves, as well as their supplier pool, right? Because this is something that tends to be a little bit less, how shall I say, anticipated in advance. A lot of very high level services that work in the 90% response mechanism domain. But for the specialized services that are often required in many EMEA countries, in particular in the Middle East and Africa, in the Middle East and North Africa space, Sub-Saharan Africa, and most recently also, I think in Western Africa, we've seen, changes in the operating environment, right? And I think ensuring that you have a very clear understanding of what the capabilities of your supplier pool is, whether they're able to actually deploy / support you, either with intelligence, information analysis, reassuring your travelers, or being able to deploy with boots on the ground at short notice, right? And not being at the very bottom of the pool of requesters when a crisis actually occurs, or being charged surge prices, what I like to call surge prices, when an event actually occurs, right? I think the reality is it's not a question of if, it's a question of actually when. And therefore, maintaining the right pool of rosters, ensuring that your travelers are prepared, not just with the background information for what they can expect when they arrive in the country. I think that's basic situational awareness that perhaps most companies get right at this stage, and most travelers get right at this stage, particularly post-COVID. I think there's a cultural change that we've seen with the travelers. But the piece that many companies don't always think about is actually, hey, traveler, this is your one paragraph, one slide brief on what to do if something happens, right? What is the action that you take in the first 30 minutes, the action that you take in the first 24 hours, and what you can expect by way of duty of care support from your company when and if you are caught up in an event like this, right? So for me, everything is 80% preparation and 20% execution. And the way in which to make the 20% easier for everybody, most of all for the person who's actually in the difficult situation, or the people who are in the difficult situation, which is your employee colleagues, is to focus on the preparation.
Thank you, Pranoti. I think great insights, and like the part about 80% preparation and 20% execution. You also spoke about having a good pool of suppliers who are tested for their capability and who are trustworthy as far as delivery is concerned. It's very interesting to hear that, because on this panel itself, we have people like you and Matt who are on the demand side, and we have Nasser Hussain, and we have Lloyd who are on the supply side, and we have Bruce who's been also in the advisory and the intelligence provisioning side. So we will take up this discussion from their angle as well subsequently. And a very interesting point that you brought up about surge pricing, Hussain, if you remember when we met in London, we discussed this and how clients hate it, but sometimes it's something which is beyond anybody's control. So it's interesting perspective, because we are talking from two sides of the fence. Nevertheless, I'll move the question now to Matt. So Matt, with
Sushil, very quickly, if I can just add one quick point, right? And I think this is exactly the point that I was trying to drive home, is that there aren't two sides of the fence. It has to be an ecosystem, right? And I think we have to understand and appreciate that we're operating in an ecosystem. So it's not really an us versus them. I think that trust building with your service provider pool has to occur before the moment of bang and not after, right? Then it's basically proving their capabilities, but the trust has to come before.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's a good point. And Matt, as part of your organization and with the kind of volatility that you deal with across the EMEA region, from Ukraine to Sudan to political instability in the Sahel region, how do you help your organization make the difficult decision sometimes that we can manage the risk versus we need to suspend operations in this location? Because now you are talking at the level of either being an enabler of business or a hindrance to the progress of business. And this is a very tough, fine line that all security professionals walk. So what is your thought process? How have you been doing this all these years?
Hi, everyone. Could I just say thank you very much for the invitation to present. With regards to our company, I think deciding between managing risks and suspending operations depends on whether those risks can be reduced to an acceptable or legal level. There's also the piece around identifying and managing it, and what the risk impact to the business may be. caveat all of that with the focus has to be on the safety of employees, wherever they are. So for me, the obvious example, having worked out sort of on the operational side of things, is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We were well aware of the Russian buildup on the Ukrainian border, and it was on every mainstream media. It was on social media. It was everywhere you could really read it. And for me, the most important piece was I wanted factual, analyzed intelligence, and that's when I leaned towards the tech on the partner platforms that the companies that we subscribe to. So once this conflict, from a practical perspective, had begun, there was a lot of uncertainty at the time. It happened quite quickly. As well prepared as we possibly were, I think when it did happen, we had to make very quick choices. And for us, the risk to the business, and the answer was that most didn't have a choice, as they were obligated by many to obviously cease operations in Russia, rightly or wrongly. It was a very fast-moving challenge where decisions had to be sort of communicated to affected employees, senior leadership, C-suite, and this was on a daily basis and sometimes multiple times during the day. So for us, the answer to the question in essence was there was an immediate risk to life and business risk in Ukraine because we've got a team in Ukraine, and subsequent business risk in Russia. So we brought all of the multiple departments together, and this had been prepared prior to the actual conflict starting. And we pulled all the information together, and it was the business partners that were looking to me as the subject matter expert to sort of provide them with the relevant information. And again, I leaned on the companies that we partner with. And although there's a lot of intelligence there, I know that in the background, Farah alluded to it earlier on, it's analyzed and verified by human beings. And I'll get to those points a little bit later on in the conversation. Not only were the Russian operations closed, but equally as important was managing the rest of the Ukraine operations. So first and foremost, like I mentioned, with the safety of the employees and their families. And I mean, this was the biggest, sort of the only war since in Europe since World War II. So for me, I've never dealt with this before. I learned literally that the fast lane came along, and it was jump in the fast lane and learn on the hop, no matter how much experience you've got. I'm reminded that it's a fine line with decision making under these really challenging circumstances and constantly monitoring conflicts. You can never really take your eye off the ball, and this has been ongoing now for 4 years and continues, and who knows when this will end. But for me, the most reassuring piece is the information that was being provided to us that was verified and validated by analysts, by a lot of these businesses. So the obvious example outside of Ukraine, just from a high-risk perspective, and again, utilizing the tech pieces, we've got operations in Nigeria, like most companies may have. And it's a very sort of ever-challenging environment. And I think we've got to focus on the countries, the neighboring countries to Nigeria. And for me, it's that militant activity that potentially leaks into the northern parts of Nigeria. We've currently got employees that live and work there. And I've currently got employees that are in Abuja at the moment as we speak, which I checked on yesterday. So it's important to be able to lean towards the tech platforms to provide me with the information. And I think a lot of the companies provide the larger cities risk indexes, but quite often some of those smaller cities and smaller towns are not really included in that. So having the ability to geolocate on the maps that are provided to us and provide us with that really important information for where our employees and operations are. Again, utilization of these third parties to help sift through the mountain of information and intelligence was a little bit of a nightmare, in all honesty. I think when it started, my inbox was just inundated with thousands of emails and about the alerts and the updates, and also to sort of put aside the government's rhetoric and ensure that you're left with the relevant facts to help you make better decisions. I think anyone.
Yeah, Matt, that's great inputs, and we'll take up the next question subsequently. But I like your insights about the use of intelligence and how you use credible partners to feed you actionable intelligence. And most important, what you said in the very beginning is that the business actually looks up to you for this advice, which is something which a lot of security professionals across the world are struggling to sort of convince their business heads that you know more about a risk region than they probably are. And they may know more in terms of operational terms, but in what the risks are to your assets and to your people, your eyes are always on the ball. So I think that's something which all of us need to take home as security professionals. Lloyd, you've been working in so many geographies across the world. You've been advocating the principle of duty of care, looking at this from a protection angle, from a look after yourself angle, from an angle of insurance liability. Do you think that duty of care expectations in the EMEA are still evolving? Have they reached a level of maturity? What are organizations still underestimating in terms of their obligations to their people?
Well, you're right there, Sushil, that things have changed and they're going to continue to evolve. So the duty of care parameters have expanded, but we see in a lot of organizations that we deal with, the policies actually haven't. And the thing is that we often use as security professionals duty of care as a sort of catch-all phrase, but in its essence, it's a legal term. Now, it's not an international legal term, and that needs to be made very, very clear. So, duty of care in English law is very different to duty of care in law in other parts of the world. So, using duty of care as this sort of a sort of pseudo legal term in many cases, where people use it perhaps in the wrong context, is not necessarily particularly helpful. I would always advocate that you're going to leave the legal terms to the legal people and make sure that they are using it in the right context. And far too often we see duty of care being used as a stick. As are some of the some of the standards, ISO 31030 as an example, but it shouldn't, none of these things in terms of travel risk management should be used as a stick. They should be used as an enabler and certainly not as a threat. And I think that sometimes that's where a lot of organizations fall down, is that they have this duty of care term that everyone has to comply with, and yet very few people actually understand what it means, particularly within law. So most people, or a lot of people now, are working more remotely or on extended deployments, whereas many of the duty of care protocols are designed for the more traditional workplace environment. And that in itself actually creates a little bit of an issue, because digital mobility risks are now part of our duty of care responsibilities as employers, as those responsible for sending people to various parts around the world. And employees are increasingly working from pretty much anywhere and everywhere. So the one size fits all duty of care simply cannot work, and it doesn't work. It needs to encompass all the risks, including cyber and risks associated with data protection as well, because when people move, their data moves with them. But that data we know is very valuable, particularly to criminal and state actors who can use that data. And obviously we hear accounts of people saying, I'm working from Spain this week, but without any real due diligence as to what that means for themselves, the risks that they might be facing, but also the organization. And that could be something as simple as how they are logging onto Wi-Fi, and what vulnerabilities that creates. So that it means that duty of care has to evolve as much as our more sort of security, our sort of more traditional rounded security needs to. And that whole work from anywhere carries significant risks. Think about tax, think about insurance, think about emergency response limitations, lack of local medical or security support. All of these things have to be factored in order for you to have an effective duty of care over your traveling employees. And on the note of crisis response, that definitely becomes a lot more challenging when resources are not available locally, or there's not been proper assessments carried out at the workplace, and organizations therefore leave themselves vulnerable as to whether or not they are discharging their duty of care appropriately. And therefore, there needs to be a complete understanding of local culture, wherever that might be, that in turn can, change dramatically. It will most definitely increase workload for the risk manager who's responsible for that. And overridingly, people need to understand that, yes, they need to understand the local laws, they need to understand the local culture. But overridingly, what they need to understand is that when they are working in another location, is that host nation jurisdiction applies. So whatever they're used to at home might not apply to where they are actually working from, and that in turn creates a number of headaches, not least of all for security managers. And with this whole compliance thing, and whether that is whether you're fulfilling your duty of care, or whether or not you're complying or adhering to or aligning with industry standards. I remember back long before everyone was talking about ISO 31030. There was a British standard called 8848, which dealt with the overseas provision of risk management, particularly for field work. So I remember working in the DRC and working for a large mining corporation. So BS 8848 came out in 2007, and I was involved in putting that whole thing together and going through the compliance parts of that. And I remember being sat in front of the security and safety board of this particular mining organization, and they asked me outright, do we comply with BS 8848? And my answer was no, we don't, and we're not going to be able to. And the reason for that was because part of BS 8848 was that you had to adhere to the Foreign Office advice for that country. Well, at the time, the DRC was considered by the World Health Organization to be the most dangerous place on the planet, and we were working in the Eastern DRC, which was the most dangerous place in the most dangerous country on the planet. And we couldn't comply with BS 8848. So that therefore impacted, our ability to fulfill a duty of care. But the reason we couldn't do it was because of the fact we weren't adhering to UK government advice. However, the policies and the processes and the training that we had in place to put those teams into the DRC far exceeded anything that was in 8848, far exceeded anything that's in ISO 31030 these days. And it far exceeded anything we'd ever done in terms of duty of care, because we realized it's not just about duty of care. We were operating in a much higher risk environment. Therefore, we had a higher duty of care and a responsibility to those traveling. So to wrap up the question, duty of care is not a one size fits all. It cannot be. It needs to be attuned to the environments you're operating in and the people who are actually going to those locations. So it's not an answer that is going to be able to close the door on it and say, okay, we'll just do this. There are so many elements that go into it, and you miss one of those elements, and then you're going to start being on the back foot. And as we all know, in travel risk management, the last place you want to be is on the back foot.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lloyd. And just a quick follow-up with a yes or a no. When you advise your clients and the people that you are advising about the kind of 360-degree responsibility of managing risks and duty of care, does everyone take you seriously, or are there some people who still poo-poo the risks and say that, okay, this is not worth worrying about till something does happen?
It varies organization to organization, but you know what, Sushil, whenever you get, and we do get it, where people, say, no, we're not going to do this. Thank you very much for your time. We realize then that we're in a place where education is required, and we need to be able to educate those people. We don't hit them with a stick about it. We talk to them, and it's more a case of education and making sure that the education gets through in order that they are best able to protect themselves, their people, and their organization, and not to mention their reputation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Lloyd. And by the way, Lloyd has written an excellent book in 2018 called The Travel Survival Guide. I hope there's a 2026 version coming out, because things have seriously changed since then.
Yeah.
And look forward to reading that one as well. But before we, I'll come next to Hussein. So Hussein, you have been conducting fascinating travel safety assignments in the region that you operate in. And today you're taking a lot of assistance of technology, but at the same time, you have issues of travelers which do not wish to compromise their privacy, are reluctant about giving consent about being tracked. And at the same time, there are multiple regulatory requirements across the Europe and Middle East region. How do you balance all this and yet get the job done?
Thank you for your question. Actually, this is a very important part of the challenges we've been facing during specifically the last 2 years. If you want to look at the Middle East is a place where many organizations have been operating for years now, and we all have been working with expats. So this specific case happened with us almost a year ago, where major developmental and humanitarian organizations called us in, and they said her expats, specifically the ones who have been there in the region for over 5 years, they're actually resisting security policies that are very much important today, especially post the Gaza war and the changes that are happening rapidly. Clearly, what's happening is something very similar to the boiling frog theory, where people have been there for so long and they're very much used to everything, and they're not really sensing the increase in temperature around them. They're just getting used to it. So we stepped in. We had 2 weeks of very interesting brainstorming with the managers who actually were leading this rebellious movement. And the word surveillance kept coming up. So it's the tracking system that they had an issue with. This organization operates in Israeli and Palestinian controlled areas, Lebanon and Jordan. And I had very long sessions with them where most issues were around tracking outside business hours. That was raised very much. Wide internal access. Who can actually see who? Apparently, everyone was able to open this monitor and see where everyone is. And vague policies. For security reasons, it was not as clear as people wanted. What we came out with after this long discussion is main 5 pillars where I believe we've built something very interesting. The fact that the system is referred to as a surveillance system was actually precise. It was not a purely safety system, but it was open to everyone to use. I know where you are, and there's a lot of politics in every organization. We all know that it's not only about the security team. So we came out with very important pointers. Number one is actually purpose. The purpose of the system, it's not good enough to say this system is made for duty of care, emergency response, and early warnings. It actually has to be written in compliance and in legal terms that to make people comfortable to use it to the maximum and enable us as security experts to allocate them when we really need them, we need to protect them. So dual use is not available within the system. This is what we did. So we had it in wording in the contract that disciplinary actions or productivity related tracking and general curiosity are not allowed to be utilized through this system. It became legal. After this point, people get much more comfortable. So you can't use this to shoot me. Okay, can you expose me? Was the second question. Can you know what I do when I don't want you to know what I'm doing? And the second solution was technological. Today, we can create anything with technology. We redesigned our tracking system and we made it location based, but not GPS based, meaning we started tracking people based on the area they are in the city they are in, and we will be notified if they cross geofencing that we allocate as dangerous, but we don't really know what street they're on. We don't know their tactical moves unless one of four main events happen and they know of that and they sign on that. If incident nearby happens, we straight away can have access to their specific location with the presence of a security manager at the GSOC. If they miss to check in, if they press their panic button, their ISOS, or if they actually inform us that tomorrow we're going to be driving on a high risk route. Part of the procedures, we're going to be monitoring you on minute by minute basis. So the first one, identifying purpose and eliminating misuse. The second one was using the right technology for the purpose. We don't need to know more than what we need to know. And that made us be more reliable. And the third one was consent and choice. Consent, you always have to have consent. People have to understand what you're doing and sign it. Choice, have it or not to have it. What we advised as security expert was based on the environment. If you're deployed to Gaza, you have no choice. If you don't understand why am I monitoring you on 24/7 basis, even when you're sleeping while in Gaza, you shouldn't be deployed in Gaza. That's my theory as a security personnel. If you're deployed in Amman, in Jordan, you have a choice. But the choice is also controlled. It's not yes or no. We embedded on the app options. So you could put pause tracking, off duty mode, travel only, and the app will actually decide how much the GSOC officer can see when you're on those different modes. That's in Amman again, not in Gaza. So based on those 3 pointers, we were able to actually convince the users that this is designed specifically to the safety need and can't be utilized to monitor you. The last pointer was access control. So the GSOC itself had very important training on how important and sensitive the data is. We actually educated them that you are playing the role of a doctor here. Every piece of information is between you and the person. We should not know about it unless it's need to know basis only. That was the first rule. And HR is not part of that group of people who can actually access this. We're eliminating any side effects to have full power. The other one was the basis of the roles of each person within the GSOC. Putting those multiple layers from identifying to legality to compliance to actual technological limitation created a new whole system. The way those individuals started perceiving it as if it's purely for the use of their safety, and it eliminated any side effect that can be used.
Thank you.
To be honest, I think the core of the issue after this experience was simply in how we utilized our system and for what purposes. And when we redefined it, fixing it was very simple.
Thank you. That's a great insight. And I think, echoing something what somebody on the previous panel also said, I think Luyolo said that one is having the capability, and the second is being able to tell the story so convincingly that the people buy your solution. And I think that is what most risk managers today struggle with. But having said that, I would really like to see this app of yours, Hussein, whenever convenient, and let's explore what we can do together on that. But before that, I wanted to, speak to Bruce about the various aspects of how this duty of care and resilience are coming together. We've spoken about technology, we've spoken about people, we've spoken about GSOCs, we've talked about, and of course, Bruce is an advocate of intelligence. And at the crux of it lies good leadership and decision making. So, in the next few years, what do you think will really matter more, Bruce, out of all of these things?
I want to start out backing up Lloyd. I don't like to use duty of care for all the reasons he said. And I've been beating the drum for probably a decade now to get people to talk about people risk management, the risk to the person, which is what we're talking about today, but also the person's risk to the organization, 360 degrees. So if we could focus on the asset and what our duties are around that, I think we would be in good stead. But so I guess over the next few years, and I think probably forever, the biggest failure in people risk management and resilience won't be poor leadership intent. It's going to be blind spots. So what's more important? I guess you said technology, intelligence, and leadership decision making. To me, that's a value chain, right? It's like leadership and intelligence depend on technology, right? If your sensing and analytics are weak and you don't have intelligence, you have opinions, right? At that point, it's just whatever people think. So, or worse, what I said, blind spots, which can create the real issues. So I think, technology enables better intelligence. Yes. Intelligence informs leadership. Yes. Leadership creates outcomes. Yes. You break any link in that chain, failure. So I guess just finishing this up quickly, because I know we're running a bit. Do this thought experiment right now in your mind. If you had your best leader and he or she had to make a people risk management decision right now, what would fail? Would it be your technology that they rely on? Would it be the intelligence that they are trusting? Or the organization's willingness to act on that decision? Give that a few seconds. The answer is the answer to this question: what matters most? Which one failed?
Thank
That
you.
would be my short
No,
answer to this.
absolutely.
Push
Absolutely.
on.
Thank you. Firstly, I appreciate keeping it short. And secondly, this concept of people risk management is something which I think we need to chat more about. We've spoken so much about technology. Pranoti, in your experience, have you ever come across occasions where technology has failed you, and how has technology genuinely improved the executive protection decision making, where that's a space where by and large people rely mostly on human judgment and experience?
Yeah, look, I think one of the biggest areas of improvement that has occurred over the last, I would say, 2 decades has been communication tools, right? Both one way, two way, as well as monitoring, passive monitoring, right? And these improvements are actually game changers. As many of you will know, we've had significant constraints as security professionals in being able to reach people on ground, right? I think number one, since COVID, there's been an improvement and I think an increased understanding of personal exposure. And Bruce, I completely agree with your position on people risks, right? This is essentially how I feel like this risk is best positioned, because once the individual understands that everything that is being put in place is actually being done to ensure that they get back home safely to their families at the end of a business day or a business trip, or their loved ones, this is essentially the whole reason and rationale for this endeavor, right? And I think this is the same storytelling device that I would use with our executive audience as well, is to position this as when you're traveling, you, the executive, are traveling. I want to make sure that you get home to your loved ones and to your commitments on day T+2 from your business travel, right? And I think this is the piece in terms of storytelling. But coming back to the communication component, so many examples, right? I think satellite devices proving to be unreliable. Or being unable to use satellite devices in multiple jurisdictions because of local regulation, being unable to use mass notification tools in multiple locations because of spam filters, domestic legislation that prevents the use of mass notification by agencies that are either foreign, identified as foreign, or identified as non-government organizations or private interests within the country, have all been impediments to being able to run an executive protection protocol successfully. And for me, this piece, I think, is the biggest game changer, right? Hussein actually described the application that they're deploying. And actually, Hussein's team has, he may not know this, but has actually supported my colleagues into very, very sensitive missions in the course of last year, where actually being able to have communication tools in that type of scenario was supremely helpful, right? So I think this is where, for me, the biggest game changer that's probably occurred has been in the communication space.
Thank you, Pranoti and Hussein. I think that's a good sort of support and thumping appreciation.
Endorsement. I think the word is endorsement, Sushil. 100%.
Great, superb. So that's always great to hear. And Matt, I'm sure you also use some sort of technology solution. I'm not sure whether you have a travel risk management portal or a tool already in existence. We have one, and we often reach out to people and clients to ask them for suggestions how we can improve our travel risk management portal. But what is your experience? Have you used something like this for managing and monitoring travel risks in high risk zones across multiple geographies, and how do you feel it worked?
Absolutely. I think like most companies, and we currently subscribe to two, and obviously they're two very well-known global companies, and they provide that medical and security risk, even up to and including sort of evacuations from conflict zones. It's hugely important. We live in a really geopolitically charged environment, and quite honestly, most companies here will be utilizing things like third-party travel apps as well. So it's hugely important that we ask our employees and persuade our employees to ensure that all of their travel information is booked through the app. Because if you're not on the app, it's very, very difficult to sort of monitor any kind of risk because we don't know where you are. That comes down to the people relationship piece, which I'll pick up on a little later on. Travelers should also generally, from a tech perspective, obviously they receive all the self-generated pre-trip advisories, all the information. We ask that it be acknowledged, so we ensure that they've read that. However, when it comes to high-risk travel, I sort of lean towards a slightly more personal aspect of this. I'm passionate, and for 35 years in all the industries I've worked in, safeguarding people, protecting people is hugely important to me, and it's paramount to me, really. It's the first thing that I think of when I wake up every single morning. Where are our employees? What countries are they in? Where are the high-risk employees? I know exactly right now, I can tell you exactly where all of the employees are in high-risk areas and who's at risk. And we also have the ability to sort of have third-party companies to, like I've mentioned earlier on, evacuate these people should it be required. So we've already sat down with certain conflict zones. We've spoken about Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza just recently. And I'm pretty certain that most, if not all companies here have got evacuation plans in place. We've got sat phones in place. Pranati mentioned it a little earlier on. There are some legalities, some challenges with sat phones and mass notification things in certain countries. I haven't as yet found that in the countries that we currently work in. But most TRM platforms sort of provide that country security and medical risk with the larger cities I alluded to earlier on when I spoke. But there are clear gaps around some of these. So finding the right provider is an ongoing process. I can't put hand on heart here and say I have the absolute best platforms. There is a wealth of knowledge on this call, and already I've taken away some little nuggets of information that I'll probably be reaching out to some of you after this call with regards to some of the tech that you use. But the actual management for me of these high-risk trips is a combination of the platform, providing relevant alerts, corporate security and GSOC monitoring processes, and the destination's environment, and if necessary, the ability to message impacted travelers. So this brings me to another piece of tech, which is the mass notification piece. We've all got this. I mean, for me, in my region, I haven't had any issues with it. It's hugely beneficial. It's immediate, and it gives you various modes of sort of communication with emails, voicemails, texts, all at the same time. I believe that above everything else is the partnership or relationship you have. So Hussein mentioned earlier on, it's that piece around where people are going, well, hang on a second, there's an app on my phone and you're tracking me. Who's watching me? And it's almost an immediate response. And for me, I've found that making it personal, shaking hands, having those Teams calls with people and build that trust allows you to obviously, or allows the employees to go, you know what, we're not tracking them. And genuinely and honestly, I haven't got time to track. The day job is busy enough. We don't track employees. It's there purely for when something becomes acute and we need to react and react quickly. So the TRM platforms are great, but they don't beat that strong partnership of human trust between you and the employees and the senior leaders. An additional gesture that I just do is that yesterday I've got a couple of employees that are in Abuja. I messaged them just to check in on them. I think that's far better than an auto-generated message because they can become complacent with these constant messages coming through and emails coming through. Message them, phone them, how are things going? The feedback in general is really positive. So I'd just like to end by sort of going back to what I said in the previous question, is that no one size fits all. Somebody on this panel mentioned that earlier on, it might have been yourself, Lloyd. It's important to find the right method for you and your employees. However, always keep involved in networking, and this is a fantastic opportunity here. And find out what others are doing and see what best practice may be. There's always room for improvement, no matter what you've got in your current sort of state of affairs.
Thank you, Matt. I think wonderful to hear such stories. And I think the personal outreach is something which can never be overemphasized. And I think that's something which organizations, however large, in spite of the various technology tools they have at their disposal, it's always that one voice reaching out to somebody who's in a high risk area or one voice reaching out to somebody who's in trouble, that will make all the difference between them seeing through the crisis comfortably or not. And really appreciate your insights on that. And I'm glad that you also took away a lot of important information from what the other speakers had to speak. You mentioned overarching platforms and unified platforms. Lloyd, in your experience with all the clients that you've been working with, people have multiple point solutions. Somebody has a travel tracking platform, somebody has a threat intelligence feed. There are medical assistance providers, there are physical security teams. Do you see any true integration happening anywhere? And what do you think are the major or the biggest obstacles in preventing organizations from achieving a very unified duty of care ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge goes back to Bruce's point. So Bruce, I'll give the compliment back. I'm going to reference you on this. The biggest challenge is people, without a single doubt. People are often the single point of failure. We talk about tech failures. But we've also spoken today about experience, and that experience has to come from somewhere. And that really is, often about ground truth in, and Hussein touched on that, about getting there, being on the ground, being familiar with that environment. So therefore, any system has to, in an ideal world, there'd be shared views of people, risks, and appropriate response actions across travel, security, legal, HR, medical, and all the crisis response teams. But a genuinely integrated system does three things. It detects, it decides, and it acts. So under the detect side of things, it knows where people are, what they're doing, the risks they're facing, both present and emerging risks that might be coming on. But it doesn't need to be so intrusive. And both Matt and Hussein have touched on this. You do not need to be tracking people down, what street they're going to, what bar they're going to, or anything else like that. I love Hussein's piece there about geofencing. So if they step outside of an area, then ping, that's when they're gonna get alerted. And that is part of the detection side of things. And then deciding, that is making sure that people can prioritize what's important. And we're also getting that intelligence to the right teams at the right time when they're in those particular locations. And then the acting side of that would be looking at the triggers, the supports that needs to go in place, whether that's medical, security, communications, etc. And importantly, with as little delay as possible. So we know that delay increases risk. So that's what an integrated system would need to look like. But it needs to be across people and not just systems. Too often we look at integration as being a system rather than being about the actual people, and it needs to be about people. And so, and I think there was a question in the thing there, and so I'll try and answer that question within this next section here. So I think the question was, how can security management help blend the difference across the organization, and at what level it begins, if so? So I think where it begins is that there needs to be a senior risk owner. So there needs to be ownership of risk. And too often, I've seen it in many places where you have a crisis management team. And there might be someone leading that, but what happens when that person is off sick, if they're on leave? So there needs to be a deputy for that senior risk owner. And there needs to be common definitions of risk. And when I'm not just talking about risk per se, I'm talking about the different risks that you might encounter. And then there needs to be an understanding of risk appetite. And that needs to be both organizational and individual. And that in turn leads into the whole piece around informed consent. And that needs to be part of the organizational DNA. And far too often we see cases of people going to areas where actually they're not happy going to. Their boss has said to them, listen, I'm going to be sending you over to Qatar. You're going to be over there for a couple of days or whatever. But given the tensions in the Middle East at the moment, not unreasonably, some people might say that is beyond my risk appetite. I'd rather not go there at the moment. But how often are people asking those questions? So, those are some of the other things that we need to consider. And then training. And training is absolutely key to all of this. And any training that you're doing when you're sending people overseas needs to be commensurate to the environment that people are traveling to or operating in. There's no point doing a first aid at work course for people who are going to a remote and hostile environment. They need something a lot more robust. And these training exercises need to be joint. They need to be joined up. All stakeholders need to be involved in this, and it needs to form part of that company DNA. But when you train, you need to train to failure. And this again goes back to Bruce's point. You need to make sure that you know where the gaps in your systems are. So there's no point having a training exercise where everyone wins and it's all good, it's all very, very successful, because we all know that in the real world, that is not how incidents unfold. They are deeply complex. There's lots of different parts to them. And the advice I would give on this is that success is a very, very lousy teacher. We learn more from our accidents, our incidents, than we do from our successes. And so we need to be able to take that into whatever we're doing. And training itself, platforms have changed. Looking at the attendee list, I know that there's a number of organizations that are already using something like Travel Safety Pro. If we've got a remote workforce, chances of getting them into a room to deliver travel safety and security training in person, pretty remote nowadays. So we need to be looking at tools that we can take out of the classroom and online.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Lloyd. That is really great. And I like your point about people being the biggest challenge, people being the biggest or the single point of failure, and yet people being the biggest enablers. So that takes me to Nasser Hussain. So you spoke earlier in the first round about how your GSOCs are also enabling your organizations, and yet you have local teams on ground. So how do you see the synergy between the GSOC and the local teams? You think the people on ground are better qualified to protect your clients' people and assets, or is a combination of GSOC absolutely essential? Because earlier we also heard that sometimes there is an overload of information which goes to the people on ground, the travelers themselves, and then they tend to sort of ignore these alerts which keep coming to them.
So I've started my career as an executive protection personnel. So I used to hate the sound in my ears coming from the GSOC. I always assume they think they know better, but they don't. We get distracted by their opinions while we should have eyes and ears on the clients. And so then I actually had the chance to go and build a centralized security company on a regional level where GSOC is my golden baby. He's keeping things in place and making sure no one really mess it up. So I can put myself in both boots and sympathize with both. To be specific, I think the right actually concept is not the real evolution is not where duty of care sits. It's how authority is distributed. Frankly, the last 2 years for me were a bit of changer when it comes to awareness. We've done hundreds of evacuations that are really serious. And what we recognized is the GSOC should stop being the watch tower over operations. And we can't afford as local teams to be perceived as informants for GSOC. So those two roles have to change. A new system have to be built, and it should be a hybrid system where each role is being played to the maximum, so each can have the best outcome that their role give them. To be able to do this, we should acknowledge that the GSOC is the brain. It should be built this way, it should be perceived this way, and trained this way. Meaning, they have the single source of information. We should have faith that the right information comes from the GSOC. Why is that? Because it's built to do that. It's a 24/7 bunch of guys and girls sitting in comfortable room monitoring not only the country, but the region, and able to compare, analyze, and allocate red flags without being distracted by noises, clients, principles, and panic. So that's their job. They give me that outcome on travel visibility and on intelligence. And in order for them not to abuse the power given to them, not power of knowledge, we give them an escalation logic. That escalation logic should be a threshold based. When to advise and when to move from advising to actually intervening and when to move from intervening to initiate an evacuation. All should be preset on very clear triggers. I'm very much pro standard procedures. Eliminate human error, make it clear to everyone. If we build that brain with that threshold system that has 24/7 monitoring fusion of data, it's a very powerful tool that will be able to feed us all with the right decisions that we have no capacity on the ground to actually get to. On the other hand, so what? Why not make them the decision maker? Why not centralizing it? So on the other hand, local teams are not simply a hand that you move. Local teams are actually the ones that have a very unique data set as well, which is cultural awareness, ground truth intelligence, and most important for the school I come from, local connections. We're all people of practice here. We're not theoretical. We all got to that specific incident we get back to when that phone call on that border saved the day. We did everything right, but it went wrong, and that connection saved the day. Therefore, I can't underestimate my local team and say, you're not a decision maker, you're just my executive arm. No, they have to have that checkbox in the GSOC where local team should approve specifics. Local team should feed us with ground truth intelligence and connections. And they should have the ability as well to go and take specific decisions that are mostly tactical when we are not responsive enough, because GSOC have that issue of not really knowing how urgent sometimes issues are. So tactical issues such as route changing, shelter in place, or local extraction should be able to be taken on the ground without getting back to anyone if time doesn't allow. That hybrid system creates both sides with the ability to be leaders in some places and executors in the other side. But it all should be clear and very importantly acknowledged. One last thing that the local team have that the GSOC will never have. All of us here, if we're part of a international GSOC monitoring, the duty of care for them, we are numbers on dashboards for the GSOC. We don't have really much trust in that. But we will have trust in Lloyd, who have been actually an expat on the ground for 2 years with us, and we know him, and we have that kind of feel. So when they lead, humans interact with us and they lead, we follow. So ground teams should be utilized as leadership during crisis, not GSOCs. You have to interact with humans. It gives you the upper hand. That's the final and most important part of it, in my opinion. So to just sum it up, organizations that get this right don't ask central or local. They design a system where centralized awareness enables decentralized speed. That's how everyone should be aware of. Centralized awareness, decentralized speed, we complete each other.
Thank you so much. It's such a fascinating story, and the way you put it across, really nice to hear. And that's where experience speaks. So thank you, Hussein, for telling us all of that and really appreciate it. And just, close the day's discussion, I have one question for Bruce. Matthew spoke about, over inundating people with intelligence inputs. We also saw how GSOCs are important to provide this intelligence. And today we are talking of artificial intelligence and a synergized human intelligence, Bruce. So you have been a strong proponent, creator of intelligence systems all your life. Do you feel that today we are at a stage where us absolute confidence, or will it lead to alert fatigue and hence you still need humans to jump in when required?
Okay, never use the word absolute to an intelligence officer. Let me keep this tight because I see we're running a bit late. So there's no question that AI and predictive analytics are delivering real value now, right? But my opinion is only when they're tightly governed. Otherwise, they absolutely risk false confidence, which is my biggest concern, and of course, creating alert overload, as you said, or fatigue. So, I say, AI is developing or actually delivering right now on three things: speed, prioritization, and focus, right? Bringing all of that down. It processes signals faster than humans. It filters risk down to the people who actually matter, which is that context, right? And it reduces cognitive overload, so we have more time to decide and make good judgment. So when it does anything beyond that, like pretending to replace judgment, that's when it's going to start creating real risk for the organization. And so, yes, it can create false confidence or alert fatigue, governance, and paying attention to keep that human in the loop to make those judgments, especially when it involves kinetic action or money. That would be my quickie.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And I think we can end the panel on a really positive and sort of cautionary note at the same time. And really appreciate all of you taking your time out to answer these questions, prepare for the audience. And thanks, Lloyd, for taking on the audience question as well. I think it was well appreciated. I know we overshot time a bit, Mrinal, but then the stories were so interesting that I really just couldn't put a stop. Thank you so much. Sorry for overshooting the time a little bit. And please give a big round of applause to the panelists for the wonderful insights that they gave us. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
It was
Thank you.
absolutely wonderful to listen to all of your stories. So thank you, sir. Thank you, Sushil. Thank you to all the panelists. What a great session. Fitting conclusion to today's discussion, bringing together technology, people, and organizational responsibility. As we approach the end of today's symposium, I invite Sandeep Sinha, Executive Director, Risk Consulting and Managed Services of MidCat Advisory, to share the closing remarks. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Mrinal. And at the very outset, I would like to take this opportunity to thank each and every wonderful panelist that we had, and also the audience that have been listening to us for quite some time and so patiently. And I'm very, very sure the learnings from this event will be of great value to them. We are particularly obliged to our keynote speaker, Right Honorable Sir Robert Buckland, for his very insightful and very, very powerful talk on his appreciation of leadership in an increasingly fragmented world. And he reiterated that we are not seeing a transition. We are probably seeing something more in terms of the changing world order and the increasing fragmentation. He very rightly brought out this concept of, businesses having to operate over the coming years under great global and local regulatory scrutiny and changing laws. So it is going to be very interesting to see how the robustness and the viability of trade agreements, etc., and their impact on day-to-day business evolve. One very important thing that he brought out is that risk is no longer on the sidelines of strategy. It needs to be a very, very deeply embedded part of strategy and must play its role accordingly. It was very, very insightful, and we are very, very grateful for his speech. The first panel, we had 3 panels, very wonderfully curated, moderated, and participated in. It was intended to be, from a higher level to the mechanics of execution. Panel 1, 2, and 3. Panel 1 was beautifully moderated as usual by Colonel S.N. Kumar, where the members of this panel brought out their ideas on the impending global risks and what the direction of risk management professionals need to take. The second panel talked more about the risks and opportunities in various geographies, especially the EMEA region. And we got some very good insights from our colleagues from Africa on the opportunities and challenges that characterize that very, very large continent, which, as per many, is going to own the next 200 years. So we will see how that plays out. So very, very grateful to Farah for the beautiful moderation and to her panel members for sharing their views. Panel 3, moderated by my colleague Colonel Sushil Pradhan, covered a very, very wide canvas of security operations comprising executive protection, travel risk management, duty of care, etc. And it came out that while the boundaries of duty of care have been increasing, over a period of time, the policies have not really kept up. And some very specific examples have been given during this particular panel on the complexities and the challenges that are faced on a near day-to-day basis. One thing that stands out from all three panels is scenario planning and preparedness. So I really loved what Pranoti said, that her job entails 80% preparation and 20% execution. And that is how it should be, because a crisis is not the best of places to learn and start preparing. Related to scenario planning is another important point that Pramod brought out initially, that companies are now having to prepare for, not really expected scenarios of training their own people for conflict, or what to do in a conflict. Similarly, examples were given from the Ukraine-Russia conflict that is there. So all in all, I think it has been a great education to people who are from the security risk management and threat management fields. And I'm sure the audience would have gained significantly. I would also like to mention the unveiling of the 2 risk reports by my colleague Anushka, and the demonstration of data server, especially GoSafe and SAM.ai by Abhijit. Believe me, a lot of effort has gone into preparation of those documents. A lot of research work has gone into it. And I would like to congratulate all my colleagues in the threat intelligence team who have come up with that. Once again, thank you very much, respected speakers, for your accord of privilege to us for being part of this event. And thank you very much to the audience, who I'm sure are carrying great takeaways from here, which hopefully they will implement starting now to make their respective organizations more safe and secure. So thank you so much. Brunal, back to you.
Yes. Thank you, Sandeep, for giving a crisp summary and insightful closing remarks. And to our dear audience, thank you all for your participation and engagement at the MidCat's EMEA Risk Symposium 2026. If any of your questions went unanswered, we encourage you to connect with the MidCat team after the event. Please do follow us on LinkedIn and our other channels to stay updated on future insights and reports. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.